Hey guys, today we're going to unravel a story so fundamental to your daily existence, you probably don't even think about it. You wake up, maybe glance at the digital numbers glowing on your phone, or the hands sweeping across your wristwatch. You know it's Tuesday, or July 14th, or 3:17 p.m. That certainty, that intricate dance of seconds and minutes and days, feels as natural as breathing, doesn't it? But peel back the layers of modernity, strip away the precise atomic clocks and the meticulously engineered apps, and you'll find a vast, churning emptiness where time once was an elusive whisper. Imagine for a moment, living without any fixed point, no tomorrow or yesterday beyond the immediate rise and fall of the sun. It's a concept so disorienting, so utterly devoid of structure, that frankly, you probably wouldn't survive it for long. Your carefully planned schedule, your weekend binge-watching, your very notion of later or next week would dissolve into an undifferentiated now. You find yourself, back then, not in front of a screen, but beneath an impossibly vast, star-strewn sky. The air is cool, carrying the scent of damp earth and distant wood smoke. You're huddled around a flickering fire, and your gaze, like everyone else's, is drawn upward. There, suspended in the inky blackness, hangs the moon, not just a pretty ornament, but a living clock, slowly, inexorably changing its shape night after night. You don't have words like waxing crescent or waning gibbous, yet, but you feel its rhythm. You see it grow from a sliver to a brilliant orb, then diminish again, dissolving into nothingness before reappearing, reborn. This is the moon's whisper, a constant, undeniable beat against the silence of endless nights, teaching you the very first, most intuitive lesson in timekeeping. You notice that certain events coincide with these lunar phases. Perhaps the tides are highest when the moon is full, making fishing easier. Or maybe a particular plant blossoms only after the third full moon since the last big hunt. You begin to connect these dots, not with complex equations, but with the raw, visceral understanding of a creature deeply embedded in its environment. You're not just observing, you're living these cycles. The very first calendars in their crudest forms weren't etched in stone tablets or written on scrolls. They were etched into your memory, into the collective memory of your small tribe, a shared understanding of when the mammoth herds would pass, or when the berries would ripen. It's a wonderfully organic system, if a little vague for scheduling your dental appointments. Then, as the sky lightens and the moon retreats, the sun makes its grand entrance. Its march across the sky is different, more immediate, defining the difference between day and night, between hunting and resting. But the sun holds a deeper secret, a slower, more profound rhythm. You observe its rising point on the horizon shifting subtly day by day, like a slow-motion dance. You feel the warmth intensify as it climbs higher in the sky during one part of the year, and then recede as it drops lower in another. The days lengthen, then shorten. The trees burst into green, then turn fiery, then stand stark and bare. These are the seasons, dictated by the sun's relentless march. You learn that after the cold, bitter months, the sun will always return, bringing new life. It's a promise, an assurance that the world isn't just ending, it's transforming. Think about how you might mark these observations. You might pick up a bone, perhaps from a deer you just hunted, and carefully carve a series of notches into it. One for each day the moon changes its shape, or for each full moon cycle. This isn't just doodling. It's the birth of data collection, albeit with extremely low-tech tools. Mainstream historical fact alert. The Ishango bone, discovered in Congo and dating back over 20,000 years, is a famous example. It's a fibula with a series of deliberately cut notches, arranged in distinct groups, leading many archaeologists to believe it served as an ancient lunar calendar or counting device. You can almost feel the calloused thumb of its maker tracing those grooves, trying to make sense of the vastness of time. Of course, not all early calendars were quite so portable. Imagine carefully aligning stones, perhaps in a circle, so that on the shortest day of the year, the winter solstice, the rising sun casts a shadow precisely through a specific gap, illuminating a central stone. Suddenly you have a fixed point, a moment when the sun seems to pause before beginning its slow journey back towards longer days. It's like a grand, prehistoric alarm clock, only instead of wake up, it screams, winter is halfway over, start thinking about those spring lamb roasts. Quirky tidbit. Some researchers even suggest that certain cave paintings, beyond depicting animals, might have incorporated astronomical symbols, effectively creating visual calendars or star charts on cave walls. So, while you're admiring a remarkably lifelike bison, you might also be inadvertently reading the local lunar forecast. Historians still argue whether these intricate patterns were purely calendrical or served other, more spiritual or narrative purposes too, or perhaps a blend of both. It's a debate that keeps tweed-wearing academics up at night, which, if you think about it, is a pretty good use of time. You're beginning to understand that time isn't just happening to you. You can track it. You can predict. You can plan. Even if that planning extends only to knowing when the migratory birds will next appear, or when the dry season will arrive. This rudimentary sense of order, born from observing the steady, cyclical dance of the heavens, is the bedrock upon which all future human civilization would be built. It's the very first step towards wresting control from the chaotic flow of existence, a quiet rebellion against the unpredictable. You are, quite literally, charting your future, one moon phase and sun's arc at a time. 2 lunar pitfalls revealed. Discover how humanity's first attempts at timekeeping, based solely on the moon, led to seasonal confusion. You stand at the mouth of your cave, the cold night air biting at your exposed skin. Above, the moon, a sliver of silver, hangs pregnant with promise. You watch it, as you've watched it countless times before. It's waxing and waning a familiar rhythm in the vast, bewildering symphony of the natural world. This is your clock, your calendar, your everything. You feel it in your bones, this primal connection to the celestial dance. Each new moon signals another turning of the wheel, another marker in the endless hunt for sustenance. You've learned to count its cycles, perhaps by notches on a bone or by carefully arrayed pebbles, a rudimentary system that feels profoundly intuitive. It's simple, elegant, and utterly disastrous for predicting the future. See, you're counting moons, and for a while it works. You track the moon's face, from a sliver to a full orb and back again. That's roughly 29.5 days. You string together 12 of these lunar cycles, and bam, you think you've got a year. You're patting yourself on the back, feeling pretty clever for having figured out the cosmic timing. But then, as the 13th new moon peeks over the horizon, you notice something unsettling. The berries aren't ripe yet. The migratory birds you rely on for winter protein haven't arrived. The chill in the air, the one that should signify the coming snows, is lingering, or perhaps it's arrived too early. You look at the calendar in your mind, the one built on the moon's predictable phases, and then you look at the world around you, and there's a creeping, chilling dissonance. This is where the grand, ingenious, moon-based calendar, the one you painstakingly crafted in your mind, starts to fall apart. You thought you had it. You thought you could anticipate the harsh grip of winter or the bountiful generosity of summer. But the moon, bless its luminous heart, doesn't care about the seasons. Not precisely, anyway. Its cycle is a constant, steady drumbeat, while the Earth's orbit around the sun, the true architect of our seasons, plays a slightly different, longer tune. 12 lunar cycles add up to approximately 354 days. A solar year, the time it takes for the Earth to complete one full revolution around the sun. And thus, the true arbiter of seasonal change is closer to 365.25 days. That seemingly small 11-day discrepancy might not sound like much, but over time, it adds up. And for you, an early human trying to survive another brutal winter, those 11 days are the difference between a full belly and a truly miserable, potentially fatal miscalculation. You're essentially playing a cosmic game of hide-and-seek, and the seasons keep changing their hiding spot. You probably won't survive this if you don't figure it out soon. Imagine the confusion. You've just celebrated the winter new moon, but it's suddenly a balmy afternoon. Or perhaps you've marked the summer new moon, eagerly awaiting the abundant harvests, only to find the land still locked in the icy grip of an unseasonal frost. This wasn't just a minor inconvenience, like accidentally showing up to a party a week early. This was life-or-death stuff. If you misjudged the planting season, your crops failed. If you missed the migration of the animals you hunted, your larder went bare. If you failed to prepare for the deep cold, you froze. The lunar calendar, for all its elegant simplicity, was a beautiful lie when it came to the longer rhythms of Earth. Historians still argue whether the primary motivation for shifting away from purely lunar calendars was the need to track seasons for agriculture, or perhaps for religious festivals that needed to align with specific astronomical events like solstices or equinoxes. It's a chicken-and-egg scenario for the ages, debated fiercely over lukewarm coffee in dusty academic halls. But what's undeniable is the growing frustration of our ancient ancestors, scratching their heads and looking up at that seemingly unhelpful moon. You were supposed to help us, you might grumble, shaking a fist at the sky, feeling a bit like you'd been pranked by the universe. Some early societies tried to fudge it. They'd simply add an extra, intercalary, month every few years, whenever the seasonal drift became too noticeable. It was a bit like hitting the reset button on your old VCR when the tracking went wonky. A clunky, reactive fix, rather than a proactive solution. Imagine trying to explain that to your nomadic tribe. Okay, so this year we have 13 moons instead of 12. Don't ask why, just trust me. The berries will be ripe eventually. Probably. It required a lot of faith, and probably even more patience from a populace already teetering on the edge of survival. This haphazard addition of months led to some truly peculiar calendar systems. For instance, some cultures, particularly those in the Middle East, developed lunisolar calendars, attempting to keep both lunar phases and the solar year in sync. They'd meticulously track the moon, but every now and then, they'd insert an extra month to prevent the calendar from drifting too far from the seasons. Think of it like a really complicated game of hopscotch, where every few jumps you have to add an extra square just to land correctly. It was an acknowledgement of the moon's inadequacy for long-term seasonal planning, a quiet admission that relying solely on its shifting face was akin to navigating a vast ocean with only a leaky bucket. You might get somewhere eventually, but it wouldn't be pretty. The development of astronomical observation tools, even rudimentary ones, became crucial. Early humans started to pay closer attention to the sun's position at dawn or dusk, tracking its rise and set points against distant landmarks. They noticed the changing length of shadows, the arc of the sun across the sky. These subtle shifts, though less immediately obvious than the moon's dramatic transformations, held the key to unlocking the true rhythm of the year. The sun was dependable, relentless, always arriving back at the same point in the sky at the solstices, even if the moon was playing fast and loose with the seasonal timing. It was as if the universe was whispering, "Look closer, my dear human. The sun holds the secrets you seek." And you, tired of shivering through summer or sweating through winter when your lunar calendar said otherwise, started to listen. You began to understand that the sun, that silent, fiery giant, was the true maestro of the seasons. And the moon, while lovely, was just a pretty, if somewhat unreliable, drummer. This newfound understanding, or perhaps just a dawning suspicion, marked a critical turning point. The moon, once your sole temporal guide, was being gently, reluctantly, relegated to a supporting role. Its beauty remained, its influence on tides and human psyche undeniable, but its utility as a precise long-term calendar was being seriously questioned. You couldn't just add another notch to your bone stick and hope for the best anymore. The stakes were too high. The very survival of your community, the success of your hunts, the bounty of your harvests, all hinged on deciphering the sun's silent, annual journey. The moon had shown you the days and the months, but the sun, you were slowly realizing, was showing you the year. And the year was what truly mattered for the cycles of life and death on Earth. The moon, with its constant, reassuring presence, was a trickster. A beautiful trickster, to be sure, but a trickster nonetheless. It promised consistency, but delivered confusion when it came to the grander scheme of things. And so you, our intrepid ancestor, began to turn your gaze, ever so slightly, from the captivating, ephemeral glow of the moon, towards the unwavering, life-giving brilliance of the sun. The next great challenge, then, was to somehow integrate these two disparate celestial rhythms into a single, cohesive, and ultimately useful system. A system that wouldn't leave you shivering in June or sweating in December. The biting wind whips around you, carrying the scent of damp earth and the distant bleating of your small flock. You squint, your eyes tracing the slow, deliberate arc of the sun across the sky. Gone are the days when your ancestors, or even you just a few generations ago, could wander, following game trails and ripening berries wherever they led. Now, your life, your very survival, is tethered to this patch of ground, to the tiny seeds you've painstakingly pressed into the soil. You've learned the hard way, through gnawing hunger and withered crops, that the moon's fickle dance, while beautiful, is a terrible liar when it comes to knowing precisely when to plant. Remember that feeling of dread, staring at barren fields because the lunar cycle had convinced you spring was here, only for a late frost to sweep through and snatch away your hopes, along with your dinner. Yeah, those were the good old days, if by good you mean you probably won't survive this. Now you live by a different clock, a hotter, brighter one. You feel it in your bones, in the way the sun warms the topsoil, in the length of the shadows at midday. Your existence has become a master class in solar observation, born not of idle curiosity, but of pure, unadulterated necessity. You have to know, with chilling accuracy, when the floods from the distant mountains will swell your river, when the rains will arrive, when the dormant earth will finally awaken. Get it wrong just once and your community faces starvation. Your children's bellies will ache, their faces drawn and pale. The stakes, you realize with a shiver, couldn't be higher. This isn't just about marking time. It's about predicting the future, about bending the very rhythm of the earth to your will, or at least to your planting schedule. As you stand there, Watching the sun dip lower, painting the sky in fiery hues, you begin to notice patterns your nomadic ancestors might have overlooked or simply disregarded. The sun doesn't just rise and set. Its highest point in the sky shifts ever so slightly day by day. Its sunrise and sunset points creep along the horizon. You see how the shortest day of the year, the deep chill of winter, consistently heralds the slow, almost imperceptible return of longer days. And the longest day, the height of summer's warmth, signals the inexorable march towards autumn's bounty. And then, the lean times again. You, and countless others like you across the nascent agricultural world, aren't just observing. You're calculating. You're building the first truly reliable calendar, not with marks on bones, but with observation, with monuments of stone, with an understanding that the sun, for all its dazzling power, is remarkably consistent. Mainstream historical fact time. One of the most significant early impacts of agriculture on timekeeping was the development of fixed-point calendars, often tied to solstices or equinoxes, because these moments represented critical junctures in the growing season. For example, ancient Egyptian civilization, entirely reliant on the annual flooding of the Nile for their crops, developed a sophisticated solar calendar with 365 days, divided into 3 seasons directly linked to the river's inundation, growth, and harvest. They noticed that the heliacal rising of Sirius, the brightest star in the night sky, coincided almost perfectly with the Nile's annual flood, giving them a celestial marker for their most important agricultural event. It was a cosmic alarm clock, perfectly tuned to the river's rhythm. Now for a quirky tidbit. While many early agricultural societies looked to the sun, some also developed very specific, localized celestial observations for planting. For instance, in some parts of the Andes, indigenous farmers still plant certain potato varieties when the Pleiades star cluster, or the Seven Sisters first appears at a particular angle in the sky before dawn. If the cluster is faint, it might indicate a dry year, prompting them to plant more drought-resistant crops. It's a cosmic whisper, telling them how to farm based on light years away. You might call it astrological agriculture, though I'm fairly certain they weren't checking their potato horoscopes. You find yourself, like early farmers across the globe, looking for markers, for anchors in the relentless flow of time. Perhaps you set up a simple stick in the ground, watching the shadow it casts shrink and lengthen throughout the year. Maybe you notice a specific notch on a distant hill where the sun rises on the longest day, or a particular boulder aligns perfectly with the setting sun on the shortest. These seemingly simple observations are, in fact, the very foundations of astronomical science, born not in grand observatories but in muddy fields, driven by the primal urge to survive. And historians still argue whether these earliest solar-aligned structures were primarily for calendrical purposes, or if they held equally significant ritualistic or spiritual meanings, weaving the sacred and the practical into a single, seamless tapestry. Was it science, or was it a really elaborate prayer for a good harvest? Perhaps, like a perfectly ripe tomato, it was both. The precision needed for agriculture shifted the human perception of time from a fluid, intuitive understanding based on lunar phases to a more rigid mathematical one based on solar cycles. The moon, with its comforting glow, was fine for knowing when to gather by the campfire, but it was useless for predicting the exact moment to prepare the soil for barley. Your very life, the life of your family, hangs in the balance of these calculations. You learn to read the slight tilt of the earth, the subtle changes in the sun's path. You become a living sundial, your body attuned to the planet's silent orbit, because if you don't, your family might just become compost for next year's crops. It's a sobering thought, isn't it? A calendar is no longer a charming little memory aid. It's a life-or-death operating manual. And you, my friend, are one of its very first, very stressed-out authors. You stand at the riverbank, the sun a relentless furnace beating down on your brow. The air shimmers with heat, thick with the scent of fertile mud and the distant hum of insects. This isn't just any river. This is the Nile, the very lifeblood of your existence, stretching north and south as far as the eye can see. You've toiled in these fields for generations, planting your meager crops in the rich, black earth that remains after the great flood recedes. But for weeks now, the river has been shrinking, the banks revealing more and more cracked, sun-baked mud. A nervous murmur runs through the village. Will it come this year? Will the life-giving waters rise again? Because if they don't, if the Nile decides to take a sabbatical, you probably won't survive this. No crops, no food, just desert. And let's be honest, desert fashion isn't really trending this season. You remember all too well the confusion of those early, purely lunar calendars we talked about. The ones where spring might suddenly show up in what felt like midsummer, or winter would just refuse to leave. It was charming, in a chaotic, starvation-inducing sort of way. But it wasn't exactly practical for scheduling your farming calendar, or, avoiding widespread famine. Farmers, bless their pragmatic hearts, desperately needed something more reliable. They needed the sun. But even the sun, though consistent in its daily arc, didn't give a clear enough signal for the grand cycle of seasons when your entire world revolved around a single, massive, annual hydrological event. Enter the Nile, or more precisely, enter the Nile's yearly tantrum. Every year, like clockwork, or rather inspiring clockwork, the river would swell, burst its banks, and inundate the surrounding land, depositing that life-giving silt. This wasn't a gentle trickle. This was a mighty, unstoppable force that would transform your world for a few months. And crucially, it was predictable. The ancient Egyptians, being no slouches when it came to keen observation, they literally built pyramids, for crying out loud, so they were good at big projects, and even bigger maths noticed something profound. Around the time the Nile started to rise, a very specific star would make a fleeting appearance in the pre-dawn sky, just before the sun's light swallowed it whole. This star was Sopdet to them, which we now know as Sirius, the brightest star in our night sky. Its heliacal rising, that moment it becomes visible for a brief window right before sunrise, was a cosmic alarm clock for the impending flood. It was a signal, clear as a desert sky, that the most important event of your year was about to begin. This was the birth of the Egyptian civil calendar, a leap forward that finally gave humanity a consistent, fixed-length year. Unlike those messy lunar cycles, which would constantly drift against the solar year, the Egyptians developed a calendar that had a fixed 365 days. They divided it into 3 main seasons, each tied directly to the agricultural cycle dictated by the Nile. Akhit, the inundation when the Nile flooded. Perit, the growth when the land emerged and crops were planted. And Shemu, the harvest when crops were gathered. Each of these seasons had 4 months, making a total of 12 months. So far, so good, right? 12 months, 30 days each, equals 360 days. But wait, 360 isn't 365. This is where things get interesting, and a little bit like trying to fit a square peg in a round calendar hole. To make up the difference, they added 5 extra days at the end of the year, which they called the epigonal days, or Hiriyu Renpit, literally, those which are upon the year. These were not part of any month and were often considered unlucky or special, a kind of calendrical purgatory before the new year officially began with the heliacal rising of Sirius. It was a neat trick, a clever workaround that allowed them to align their calendar with the actual solar year. And just like that, farming became a much less stressful affair. You knew when to plant, when to harvest, and when to get out of the way of a really big river. No more guessing games, no more blaming the moon for your bad harvest. It was glorious. Now here's a quirky tidbit. The Egyptians, despite their ingenious 365-day calendar, didn't initially account for the extra quarter day that makes a true solar year 365.25 days long. This meant their calendar slowly drifted. Every 4 years, it would be off by a full day. Over centuries, this tiny discrepancy added up, causing their calendar to slowly rotate through the seasons. So eventually, the inundation season, which was supposed to align with the Nile flood, would occur months before the actual flood. Imagine trying to plant your seeds during the flood season, only to realize the river decided to take its sweet time that year. This drift was slow, almost imperceptible over a human lifetime, but over 1460 years, a period they called a Sothic cycle, named after the star Soptit, Sirius. Their calendar would completely cycle through all the seasons and come back into alignment with the heliacal rising of Sirius. It was a very long-term problem. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians fully understood this drift from the outset, or if it was something they only slowly came to grips with. Some suggest they were aware, but didn't implement a leap day system because it would disrupt their religious festivals and a meticulously structured bureaucracy. Others believe the concept of a leap day simply hadn't occurred to them yet. What's clear is that, for most of their history, they stuck with the fixed 365-day year, a testament to their deep trust in the simplicity and elegance of their original system, even if it eventually played a long game of calendrical hide-and-seek with the seasons. It wasn't until much later under Roman influence that the leap day was formally introduced, giving us the calendar we largely recognize today. But before that, their steadfast reliance on the Nile and its celestial herald, Sirius, gave them arguably the most stable and enduring calendar system the ancient world had ever seen. A marked improvement from trying to figure out if it was planting season by squinting at a half-eaten moon and crossing your fingers. It's almost enough to make you miss the simple days of just following the moon, isn't it? Almost. But then you remember the hungry bellies and the confused crops, and you quickly realize that sometimes a little predictable river and a really bright star are exactly what you need to keep your ancient civilization humming along, one predictable flood at a time. You feel the dry, hot wind whip around you, carrying the scent of dust and something vaguely agricultural, maybe a little bit like sun-baked clay and animal musk. You're standing, or perhaps more accurately, squelching slightly, on the banks of a great river, far from the predictable annual rhythms of the Nile. This isn't verdant, stable Egypt. This is Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers Tigris and Euphrates. Here, the celestial bodies still whisper their secrets, but they're a lot more enigmatic, less on time. The sun still arcs across the sky, a fiery charioteer. But it's the moon, that pale, waxing, waning goddess, that truly holds sway over your understanding of time. And let me tell you, trying to build a stable life around the moon's whims, especially when you're relying on agriculture for your very survival, is a bit like trying to herd cats with a wet noodle. You probably won't survive this, not without a very robust calendar. Remember how those early farmers, the ones you watched toiling under the sun, eventually realized that a lunar calendar, ticking along in 29.5-day increments, was just plain wrong for knowing when to plant or harvest. Well, the Mesopotamians, with their burgeoning cities and complex societies, felt that pain even more acutely. They were, in many ways, the first true urbanites, and urban life demands precision. If you're trading grain, collecting taxes, or scheduling religious festivals, you can't just shrug and say, "Oh, it's roughly harvest season, sometime in the next 3 weeks, give or take." That's how empires crumble, my friend. So you're here thousands of years ago, and you're part of this vibrant, bustling society. You watch the moon. Each new crescent marks a new month. A beautiful, intuitive system, isn't it? 29 or 30 days pass, and then, boom, a new moon, a new month. 12 of these lunar cycles make a year, but here's the kicker. 12 lunar cycles only add up to about 354 days. That leaves you with a deficit of roughly 11 days compared to the true solar year, the one that dictates the seasons. 11 days might not sound like much, but let it accumulate for a few years, and suddenly your spring planting festival is happening in the dead of winter, or your summer solstice celebration is freezing its sandals off in early autumn. It's like your favorite streaming service constantly pushes back the release date of the new season, but instead of just annoying you, it actually causes famine. Not ideal. This is where the intercalation comes in. It's a fancy word for simply adding an extra month into the calendar to bring the lunar cycles back in line with the solar year. The Egyptians, with their mighty Nile, had it relatively easy. The river's flood was their natural clock, helping them fix their solar year. But here, in Mesopotamia, without such a clear, regular natural phenomenon to anchor their year, things got messier. Imagine you're a high priest, or perhaps an astronomer priest, because in Mesopotamia, those roles often blurred into one, like a really old, wise version of your favorite multitasking app. You're tasked with keeping time. You're watching the stars, yes, and the moon, but you're also probably watching the crops, listening to the grumbling farmers, and maybe even checking the vibes from the deities. When the calendar starts drifting too far, when the spring equinox is clearly not aligning with the month that's supposed to be spring, you have a problem. So, what do? You declare an extra month. This additional month was usually inserted after the 12th month of the year, essentially making it a 13th month. But unlike later, more sophisticated systems, these early Mesopotamian intercalations were often ad hoc. There was no fixed, predictable cycle for when to add these months. It was more of a "we'll add one when things feel really out of whack" kind of situation. Think of it as hitting the reset button on your Wi-Fi, but only when you're streaming movie buffers for so long that you've finished your entire snack supply. Historians still argue whether the decision to intercalate was based purely on astronomical observation, or if practical considerations like harvest times and religious festival dates played a more significant role. Perhaps it was a blend of both, a negotiation between the cosmic and the mundane, managed by powerful temple authorities or even the king himself. For example, during the Old Babylonian period, it was often the king who would issue a decree stating that the current year would have an extra month. This meant that the king effectively controlled time, a rather significant power, wouldn't you say? Imagine if your current government could just unilaterally decide to add an extra month to the year because they felt like it. Your mortgage payments would be thrilled, your boss, not so much. This often arbitrary nature meant that different cities within Mesopotamia, even at the same time, could could have slightly different calendars. You could travel from to Lagash and find yourself in a different month or even a different year by a few days or weeks. It's not quite as chaotic as your grandmother trying to set up a new smart TV, but it had its moments. This local variation is one of the more quirky tidbits of Mesopotamian timekeeping. While they shared a general lunar calendar framework, the precise application of intercalation could diverge, a testament to the strong autonomy of their city-states. The lack of a consistent, overarching system meant that time, in a way, was less universal than it is today. You didn't just know what month it was everywhere. You knew what month it was here. This created challenges for long-distance trade and diplomacy, though they eventually found ways to manage it, often by explicitly stating the calendar system used in contracts. Eventually, over centuries, more regular patterns began to emerge. The understanding of the 19-year metonic cycle, where 7 intercalary months are added over 19 years to bring the lunar and solar calendars into near-perfect alignment, was a Greek development, but it had roots in Mesopotamian astronomical observations. They laid the groundwork, even if their early efforts were a bit like trying to make gourmet soufflé without a recipe. It's impressive they got anything to rise at all. And so, you see the priests, perhaps with their long beards and clay tablets, debating the exact moment to insert this extra month. The fate of the harvest, the mood of the gods, even the stability of the kingdom, seemed to hang in the balance of these calendrical decisions. It was a constant dance, a delicate negotiation between the predictable cycles of the heavens and the unpredictable needs of humanity. You step now onto the sun-baked stones of ancient Greece, a land shimmering with philosophy and fierce independence, yet utterly bewildering when it came to something as fundamental as the date. Imagine, if you will, packing your finest tunic and sandals for a crucial trade negotiation in Athens, only to discover that the bustling port city of Corinth, just a short sea voyage away, is living in an entirely different month, perhaps even a different year, according to their reckoning. You clutch your papyrus contract, sweat beading on your brow, realizing that your meticulously planned schedule is, to put it mildly, less reliable than a politician's promise during election season. This wasn't merely a quaint local quirk. This was a chronological free-for-all, a cacophony of competing time frames that would make your head spin faster than a Dionysian dancer. Here, the concept of a unified calendar was as alien as, well, democracy to a Persian king. Each city-state, proud of its unique heritage, its patron gods, and its agricultural cycles, insisted on maintaining its own distinct calendar system. Think of it like modern-day football leagues. Everyone plays the same sport, but the rules, the season starts, and the scoring might subtly shift from country to country. Only here, it's not just a game. It's your life. Your sacred festivals, your political assemblies, your very perception of time itself, were all dictated by local tradition. The Athenians, the Spartans, the Corinthians, the Delphians, each had their own rhythm, their own set of named months, and their own methods for deciding when the year began or how long it would last. It was a cartographer's nightmare, if cartographers had also been in charge of scheduling international conferences. And this, dear listener, is where you probably won't survive this. Trying to coordinate anything significant across ancient Greece without a universal calendar would be like planning a surprise birthday party where everyone uses a different clock, and half the guests interpret arrive at 8 as arrive whenever you feel like it, sometime next week. Merchants would miss vital market days, diplomats would arrive at empty council chambers, and even military alliances, crucial in this turbulent era, could falter because one ally thought the agreed-upon invasion date was a month off from the others. Imagine the sheer exasperation as you try to explain to a Spartan general that your Athenian calendar places the full moon, the auspicious time for battle, 3 days later than his. The ensuing argument would be less about tactics and more about celestial mechanics, a delightful way to begin a campaign. The foundational issue lay in the Greeks' embrace of the lunisolar calendar, a system you'll recall from our Mesopotamian friends, where the lunar cycle governed the months, but attempts were made to align with the solar year for agricultural purposes. The Athenians, for example, operated on a calendar that typically had 12 months, alternating between 29 and 30 days. This gave them a 354-day year, but as you remember, the solar year is closer to 365.25 days. That pesky 11-day deficit meant that every few years, they had to insert an extra, or intercalary, month to prevent their seasons from drifting entirely out of sync. This insertion was critical, yet entirely inconsistent, making it a source of endless chronological dispute. And who decided when to add this extra month? Well, it often fell to the whims of priests, archons, or other civic magistrates. It wasn't a scientific body making these adjustments, but human beings, susceptible to political maneuvering or even simple error. A magistrate who wanted to shorten his term in office might conveniently forget to intercalate, making his year end sooner. Conversely, one who wished to extend his power might add an extra month or two. Can you imagine the chaos? Oh, you thought we were having elections next month. Well, actually, due to a sudden celestial alignment, and a particularly persuasive argument from a certain council member, we've decided to add an extra month of waiting until after harvest. So we'll see you in a bit. This arbitrary decision-making was a quirky but significant reason why a universal Greek date was a pipe dream. Each city also had its own names for these months, which, if you thought the number of different calendars was confusing, just piled on another layer of delightful complexity. Athens had Hecatombean, Metageitnian, Bodromian, Pymptian, Maemecterian, Posidian, Gamelian, Anthesterian, Elaphebolian, Maunician, Thargelian, and Scyrophorian. Sounds like a spell from a fantasy novel, doesn't it? Meanwhile, Sparta might have been calling that very same month Gerastios, while Delphi used Bucadius. Trying to pinpoint an event across city-states required a level of cross-referencing that would make a modern-day database administrator weep. It was less about telling time and more about interpreting a cryptic crossword puzzle. Only the answers changed depending on which city's solution you were using. This chronological jumble naturally spilled over into the most important events. Religious festivals, deeply tied to specific dates, would occur at different times in different polis. The famous Olympic Games, for instance, which you might think would serve as a temporal anchor, were themselves dated by a 4-year cycle, but even their precise correlation to individual city calendars remained a point of friction. When an ambassador from Syracuse arrived in Olympia to participate in the Games, he wasn't just concerned about the competition. He had to ensure his own city's calendar was in sync enough to even know when he was supposed to show up. It's enough to make you long for the simpler, if slightly less accurate, days of tracking the Nile's predictable floods. Remember that Egyptian river clock. At least the river had the courtesy to show up consistently. Historians still argue whether the practical impact of this calendar chaos was truly as debilitating as it sounds. or if people simply learned to navigate it through local knowledge and constant communication. Did the average farmer really care that Athens was in Maunitian while Corinth was still wrapping up a Laphibolian? Probably not for his daily chores, but for interstate relations, trade, and military coordination. The discrepancies clearly posed significant challenges. The lack of a uniform system meant that any attempt at precise historical dating relies heavily on correlating events across different local calendars, a task that often involves educated guesswork and a healthy dose of academic humility. The sheer inconvenience, the diplomatic headaches, and the logistical nightmares wrought by this chronological fragmentation underscored a growing need for a more rational, predictable system. The Greeks, despite their genius in so many areas, remained stubbornly diverse in their approach to timekeeping. This decentralized, almost anarchic, approach to the calendar wouldn't be truly challenged until the rise of a unified, centrally governed power, a power that understood the fundamental importance of synchronized time for ruling an empire, rather than just a collection of independent city-states. The seeds of a global calendar were very, very slowly and very painfully being sown in this very chaotic soil. You are now trudging through the muddy, cobbled streets of early Rome, the stench of unwashed crowds and market refuse clinging to the humid air. Imagine a world where the very fabric of time, the rhythm of your daily life, feels less like a steady pulse and more like a drunken staggering. You've journeyed through the Nile's predictable flow and the tangled mess of Greek city-states, each with their own baffling calendrical concoctions. But honestly, if you'd lived in Rome during its nascent republic, trying to keep track of anything more complicated than whether it was day or night would probably have driven you mad. You probably wouldn't survive this, not with the constant temporal whiplash. Here, time isn't a river, it's more like a leaky bucket, constantly needing bailing and patching, and even then half the water sloshes out. The earliest Roman calendar, the one attributed to Romulus himself, though historians still argue whether he was a real person or more of a legendary mascot for a city built on good PR, was a rather peculiar beast. It began in March with a mere 10 months, totaling just 304 days. Imagine that. You'd celebrate Saturnalia, then barely catch your breath before spring planting was upon you again, all because December was just the 10th month. The winter period, a good 61 days, was simply unassigned, a temporal no-man's land where nothing officially happened. It was as if time itself just took a holiday and wandered off to the beach for a couple of months. Farmers must have absolutely loved that, trying to figure out when to plant while the official calendar was still sipping its ancient Roman mojito. Eventually, King Numa Pompilius, Romulus's successor, another figure shrouded in the mists of legend, by the way, is credited with adding January and February to the mix, pushing the year to 355 days. A bit closer to a solar year, but still fundamentally out of sync. This new calendar was primarily lunar, like many of the earlier attempts you've witnessed, but with a twist. It aimed for an odd number of days in each month, a superstition that odd numbers brought good luck. So you'd have months of 29 or 31 days, and February, the poor little runt of the litter, ended up with 28. Even then, 355 days is still about 10 days short of a full solar circuit. This meant the seasons began to drift, like a boat untethered from its dock. Your summer harvest festival might end up being celebrated in what was, astronomically speaking, early spring. Remember how agriculture demanded a more stable calendar. Rome, bless its heart, didn't quite get the memo right away. This is where the real fun, Or rather, the real frustration began. To try and keep the calendar vaguely aligned with the seasons, a system of intercalation was adopted. Every couple of years, an extra month, called the mensis intercalaris, or the mercedonius, would be inserted after February 23rd. It was a 27-day month designed to make up the difference. Sounds reasonable, right? Just a little tweak here and there. But here's the kicker. The authority to decide when to insert this extra month, and indeed how long the year should be, rested with the pontifices, the college of priests. Now imagine giving a group of powerful, politically connected individuals the ultimate power over time itself. What could possibly go wrong? Everything, my friend, everything. The pontifices didn't exactly have the welfare of the common farmer or the smooth running of society as their top priority. Their decisions were often, shall we say, influenced by political expediency and personal gain. If you were a consul whose term was about to end, but you wanted more time in power, no problem. The pontifices, for the right price or political favor, could simply lengthen the year by adding an intercalation, extending your time in office. Conversely, if your political enemy was about to take power, or if a specific election was looming, shorten the year. Suddenly, their term or the unfavorable election date would arrive sooner. It was calendrical gerrymandering on a grand scale. This constant manipulation meant that no one really knew what day it was. Imagine trying to conduct business, schedule military campaigns, or even just know when your taxes were due. One year might be 355 days long, the next 378, then back to 355, all at the whim of a handful of priests playing temporal chess. Records from the period show Roman writers complaining bitterly about this utter chaos. Cicero, the famed orator, lamented the confusion, noting how impossible it was to accurately date events or even plan for the future. It's hard to build an empire when you don't know if it's Tuesday or next month. A quirky tidbit: the Romans didn't count days of the month forwards like we do. Oh no, that would be far too simple. Instead, they anchored their months to 3 key points. The kalends, the first of the month; the nones, the 5th or 7th, depending on the month, and the ides, the 13th or 15th. Every other day was then counted backwards from these fixed points. So March 2nd would be the 6th day before the nones of March. March 16th would be the 17th day before the kalends of April. It's like trying to navigate a city where every street sign tells you how many blocks you haven't walked yet to reach the next major intersection. Truly an invention for people who had too much time on their hands, or perhaps too little, given the constant calendric confusion. This dysfunctional system persisted for centuries, leading to a calendar that was, by the time of Julius Caesar, wildly out of sync with the solar year by as much as 3 months. The religious festivals, which were tied to specific times of year, were completely off. Spring festivals were happening in winter, and summer rites in what should have been autumn. The Romans were celebrating their gods at the wrong celestial parties, which probably didn't do wonders for their collective karma. Historians still argue whether the pontifices were primarily motivated by venality or simply by a profound misunderstanding of astronomy. But either way, the outcome was calendrical calamity. You stand in the bustling heart of Rome, the clamor of the Forum a symphony of commerce and intrigue. Sunlight, as unreliable as the calendar itself, spills over the Capitol. You clutch a wax tablet, trying to decipher the current date, to reconcile it with the last time you managed to meet a friend for a quick amphora of wine. It feels like months, but the official calendar suggests it might still be last Tuesday, or perhaps next Tuesday, depending on which ambitious magistrate just decided to add a few intercalary days to extend his term or shorten his rivals. The Roman calendar, as you'll recall, was less a tool for tracking time and more a pliable political instrument, a chronometric plaything for those in power. It was a chaotic mess of shifting months and arbitrary insertions, often leaving festivals wildly out of sync with the seasons they were meant to celebrate. You're left wondering if spring planting will ever truly arrive, or if the harvest gods will just pack up and move to a more reliably scheduled civilization. Frankly, if you were actually living through this, trying to coordinate anything from troop movements to dinner parties, you probably wouldn't survive a week just trying to figure out which day it was, let alone avoiding the actual dangers of ancient Rome. Into this chronological quagmire steps a figure so monumental, so utterly unconcerned with minor inconveniences like logic or precedent, unless they served his own ends that he simply decided to fix it. His name, Gaius Julius Caesar. By 46 BCE, Caesar was not just a general, not just a politician. He was effectively the master of the Roman world. He'd just returned from a triumphant campaign in Egypt, steeped in the ancient wisdom of a land that, ironically, had figured out solar timekeeping centuries before Rome had even dreamt of conquering anything beyond its immediate neighbors. Remember how the Egyptians, with their predictable Nile floods, had intuited a remarkably stable solar calendar. Well, Caesar was about to borrow a page, or rather, an entire almanac from their playbook. He didn't do it alone, of course. Even a genius like Caesar understood that astronomical reform required, well, an astronomer. So he brings back with him from Alexandria a fellow named Sosigenes. Now, Sosigenes wasn't just some stargazer. He was a serious mathematician and astronomer, deeply versed in the Hellenistic tradition that had perfected the observational methods necessary to truly understand the solar year. Imagine Caesar, the conquering hero, sitting down with this quiet scholar, perhaps over a particularly strong vintage, and saying something to the effect of, "All right, Sosigenes, this calendar situation, it's a total mess. My troops are showing up for winter maneuvers in summer tunics. My tax collectors don't know what month it is. Fix it, and make it snappy." Sosigenes, no doubt, probably just sighed and reached for another papyrus scroll, already having the solution largely worked out in his head. Their solution, the Julian calendar, was revolutionary precisely because it was, for the first time in Roman history, based firmly on the sun's journey through the heavens, rather than the fickle moon or the even more fickle whims of the pontifices. The core principle was simple, elegant even. A year of 365 days, with an extra day added every fourth year, creating an average year length of 365.25 days. This was a direct adoption of the Egyptian solar year concept, tweaked slightly for greater accuracy. It sounds so straightforward to us now, accustomed as we are to the Gregorian calendar, which is just the Julian calendar with a few minor, but important, tweaks we'll get to later. But for the Romans, it was like suddenly being handed a GPS after centuries of navigating by asking random strangers where the next milestone was. The implementation, however, was anything but simple. To get the calendar back in sync with the seasons, after centuries of neglect and political meddling, they had to create the longest year in human history, 46 BCE. This colossal year stretched for a mind-boggling 445 days. Imagine trying to explain that to someone. "Oh, you thought this year was long? Well, Caesar just added 3 extra months, so hold on to your togas because we're still in the year of confusion." It was known as the Ultimus Annus Confusionis, the last year of confusion, and for good reason. They jammed in 2 intercalary months, on top of the usual one, effectively creating an administrative nightmare, but a necessary one, to realign the Roman world with the true solar year. You might have thought your last tax season was long. Try one that lasts 445 days. This monumental act stripped the Pontifex Maximus, a role Caesar himself conveniently held, of his arbitrary power over the calendar, transferring the responsibility from religious and political manipulation to astronomical precision. It was a massive demotion for the calendar, from a sacred tool of power to a mere instrument of timekeeping. And while the calendar itself was simplified, the names of the months, of course, retained their often confusing Roman origins, a tradition we still mostly adhere to today. January named after Janus, the god of beginnings. February from Februa, a purification festival. March after Mars, the god of war, and so on. Though, as we know, some later emperors would try to rename months after themselves, with varying degrees of success and lasting cultural impact. The Julian calendar, with its fixed length and regular leap years, provided a stability that Rome had never known. Its standardized administrative dates made agricultural planning far more reliable and ensured that religious festivals would consistently occur in their proper seasonal context. No longer would the harvest festival fall in the dead of winter, or the rites of spring happen in high summer. This reform was perhaps one of Caesar's most enduring legacies, a quiet revolution of order that outlasted even his own life. Historians still argue whether Sosigenes or Caesar himself was the primary driver of the specific mathematical and astronomical calculations, or if Caesar merely provided the political will and resources for Sosigenes to implement his vision. It's a classic chicken or egg scenario in the annals of ancient innovation. But regardless of who held the quill, the result was a triumph of applied astronomy and political will. Rome finally had a calendar that worked, a calendar so robust that it would serve as the backbone of timekeeping for the Western world for over 1,500 years. You see, while Caesar was busy conquering Gaul and crossing the Rubicon, he was also, quite literally, building the very framework of your future scheduling apps. It was a good thing he did, because without it, you'd still be trying to figure out if that toga party was last week or next year, and your online delivery orders would arrive whenever the current Pontifex Maximus felt like it. You leave behind the calculated, often clumsy world of Roman numerals and leap years, the practicalities of agricultural cycles dictating the very fabric of time. One moment, you're standing with Julius Caesar, watching his Alexandrian astronomer Sosigenes explain the intricacies of a 365-day year. The next, the air thickens, grows heavy with the scent of damp earth and exotic blossoms, and the sounds of distant howler monkeys echo through a canopy so dense it filters the very sunlight into shifting, emerald patterns. You've stepped through a temporal curtain, from the linear march of Western time into the mesmerizing, cyclical, deeply interconnected cosmic dance of the ancient Maya. Here, in the heart of Mesoamerica, the very concept of time is different. It doesn't just flow like a river. It's more like a complex, multi-geared clockwork, where dozens of wheels of varying sizes spin simultaneously, clicking into alignment at precise, meaningful intervals. You aren't merely counting days from a fixed point. You are observing the perpetual interplay of divine forces, astronomical cycles, and the very breath of the cosmos. Imagine trying to explain our modern obsession with seconds and minutes to someone whose entire temporal existence is governed by repeating patterns of 20, 13, 260, 365, 52, and truly vast, almost unfathomable numbers. It would be like trying to teach a fish to ride a bicycle. The Maya, far from being crude timekeepers, developed one of the most sophisticated calendar systems in human history, one that made Caesar's innovations look like a child's abacus. They meticulously observed the heavens, not just for agricultural cues, but for deep spiritual understanding. Their time wasn't just a record, it was a prophecy, a living entity that brought with it specific energies and destinies. At its core, you encounter two primary cycles that weave together like complex threads in a cosmic tapestry. First, there's the Tzolk'in, the sacred round, a 260-day calendar. This cycle combines 20-day names with 13 numbers, creating unique permutations for each day. Imagine, if you will, a rotating wheel of 20 distinct images: crocodile, wind, night, seed, serpent, death, deer, rabbit, water, dog, monkey, path, reed, jaguar, eagle, vulture, earth, flint, storm, ahau, Lord, paired with another wheel of 13 numbers, 1 through 13. Every day a new combination appears. 1 crocodile, then 2 wind, then 3 night, and so on until 13 ahau. Then it starts again with 1 amix crocodile. This 260-day cycle is deeply tied to rituals, ceremonies, and the very timing of life events, perhaps even mirroring the human gestation period. It's a rhythm that pulses through their spiritual existence. Then there's the Hob, the civil calendar, a 365-day cycle remarkably similar in length to our solar year, but structured very differently. It's composed of 18 months, each 20 days long, which gives you 360 days. The remaining 5 days, they were known as the Wayeb, a short 5-day period at the end of the Hob year. These days were considered highly unlucky, dangerous, a time when the veil between worlds thinned and people were advised to remain inactive, to avoid leaving their homes, to speak quietly, and to generally exist as little as possible. Think of it as a mandatory, ancient, 5-day staycation where going outside might literally invite cosmic misfortune. You probably won't survive this period if you don't heed the warnings and accidentally step on a sacred beetle or something. Now here's where the true genius and the nonlinearity that might make your brain hurt comes into play. These two calendars, the Tzolk'in and the Hob, operate concurrently. Every day has both a Tzolk'in designation, e.g., 4 ahau, and a Hob designation, e.g., 8 kumku. These two systems only align and repeat the exact same combination every 52 years. This interlocking mechanism is called the calendar round. For the Maya, this 52-year cycle was profoundly significant, marking a sort of century for them, a period of renewal, often accompanied by special ceremonies. Imagine trying to remember a specific date from your grandmother's childhood, not just by year, but by its unique calendar round signature. Oh yes, that happened on 4 ahau 8 kumku of her 3rd calendar round. It makes modern date notation feel blessedly straightforward. But even this wasn't enough for the Maya. To track events over vast stretches of time, to chart cosmic history and prophecy far beyond a mere 52 years, they developed the long count. This system is truly staggering in its scope and precision. Unlike the calendar round which cycles, the long count is a linear count of days from a mythical creation date, what we correlate to August 11, 3114 BCE. This linear count is expressed in a vigesimal, base 20 system. similar to how we use a base 10 system, but with one crucial difference in the third position to accommodate the solar year more closely. The units of the long count are K-in, 1 day winnel 20 K-in equals 20 days. Ton, 18 winnel equals 360 days. Roughly a year K-aton 20 ton equals 7,200 days or approx. 19.7 years Bacton 20 K-aton equals 144,000 days or approx. 394 years. And it goes on from there, into even larger cycles like pictons, calebtons, K-inchiltons, and allotons, representing millions and even billions of years. Think about that for a moment. A civilization millennia ago, conceiving of and accurately calculating time spans that dwarf our own historical records. Their inscriptions frequently recorded dates spanning hundreds, even thousands of years, all with breathtaking accuracy. For example, their calculations for the length of the synodic period of Venus, the time it takes for Venus to return to the same position in the sky relative to the Sun and Earth, were incredibly precise, even more accurate than contemporary European astronomy. This mainstream historical fact underscores their unparalleled observational skills. This system wasn't just for showing off, though you can almost hear a Maya priest saying, "Can your calendar predict the next solar eclipse with this level of precision?" It allowed them to track celestial movements, anticipate astronomical phenomena like eclipses, and embed their history within a grand cosmic narrative. Every K-aton ending was a momentous occasion, marked by the erection of stelae with inscribed dates and prophecies. A quirky tidbit that often makes its way into popular culture, stemming from this very long count, was the infamous 2012 phenomenon. You might remember the buzz around December 21, 2012, when the long count calendar completed a Bacton cycle. Specifically, it marked the end of the 13th Bacton. Many misinterpreted this as an end-of-the-world prophecy, fueled by films and sensationalism. In reality, for the Maya, it was simply the end of a grand cycle, a monumental turning point, akin to our year 2000, not an apocalyptic doomsday. It was a time for reflection and renewal, not cosmic annihilation. Historians still argue whether the Maya viewed time as truly cyclical, with events destined to repeat in specific patterns, or whether the cycles simply provided a framework for a linear progression of history. Was the past seen as a blueprint for the future, or merely a sequence of unique moments within a repeating cosmic rhythm? This scholarly debate highlights the profound philosophical differences in how cultures perceive and interact with time itself. You stand there lost in thought, the humid air heavy, the jungle alive with unseen creatures. The Maya, unlike the Romans who sought to control time for practical and political ends, sought to understand it, to align with its cosmic flow. Their calendar was a mirror to the universe, a testament to their profound connection with the stars and cycles of existence. It was beautiful, complex, and utterly mind-bending, a far cry from the utilitarian ticking of a clock. You shift your gaze now, drifting across the vast, ancient landscapes of Mesoamerica, away from the intricate dance of Mayan cosmic cycles, and towards another powerful civilization that carved its understanding of time into stone, not just stele, but a monumental, singular disk. You stand, or rather float, before something truly awe-inspiring, the Aztec sun's stone. Imagine it, a colossal basalt monolith, weighing in at nearly 25 tons, almost 12 feet across. A dark, silent testament to a worldview far removed from our own, humming with a history of ritual, sacrifice, and an obsession with celestial rhythms. It's not just a sculpture. It's a condensed universe, a calendrical encyclopedia, and possibly an altar for hearts still beating. You could spend days, weeks even, tracing the intricate glyphs etched into its surface, each a tiny window into the Aztec cosmos. And honestly, you probably won't survive the mental gymnastics required to fully grasp its layers without a few thousand years of dedicated study, and maybe a very strong cup of cacao. The stone pulsates with concentric circles of meaning. At its very heart, a fearsome face stares out. Some scholars say it's Tenadia, the sun god with his tongue represented by a sacrificial knife, demanding blood to keep the world moving. Others argue it's the earth monster, Tlaltecutli. This is one of those lovely open scholarly debate phrases where historians still argue whether the central deity on the Aztec sun's stone represents Tenadia, the fifth sun, or Tlaltecutli, the earth monster, or perhaps both, symbolizing the interconnectedness of creation and destruction within their cosmology. Around this central visage, the four previous suns or epochs are depicted, each ending in a cataclysm. This wasn't just a calendar. It was a cosmic history lesson, a warning, and a prophecy all rolled into one very heavy, very permanent object. Now remember back to those messy, frustrating European calendars, riddled with political fixes and seasonal drift. The Aztecs had their own layers of complexity, but they were remarkably consistent, though perhaps less concerned with tracking a precise solar year for farming, and more with tracking the sacred cycles of existence. You see, the Aztecs, like many Mesoamerican cultures, operated with two main calendrical systems that intertwined like a pair of very organized, but very demanding, snakes. First, there was the Xiuhpohualli, the 365-day solar calendar, very practical, very agricultural. This calendar was divided into 18 months, each with 20 days, which, if your math is still holding up in this sleepy haze, gets you to 360 days. The remaining 5 days were, well, they were the dreaded Nemontemi. These were the unlucky or empty days, a period of immense apprehension where ordinary activities ceased. Imagine your annual leave being 5 days where everyone just stops and worries about impending doom. Kind of takes the fun out of a beach holiday, doesn't it? These 5 days were considered dangerous, a time when bad luck ran rampant, and you were best off just staying inside and probably not trying to organize any major events like, say, a really big potluck or a tax audit. This 365-day cycle was, for the most part, closely aligned with the solar year and the agricultural seasons, dictating when to plant and harvest, when to celebrate the big festivals that honored the gods of rain and maize. A bit like the ancient Egyptians and their Nile, if the Nile also came with a 5-day annual existential crisis. Then, crisscrossing with the Xiuhpohualli was the tonal Pohualli, the 260-day ritual calendar. This was the spiritual heartbeat of their society. It wasn't tied to the sun or seasons in any obvious way, but rather to a unique combination of 20-day signs and 13 numbers. Think of it like this. If you have 20 different animal signs, crocodile, wind, house, lizard, snake, death, deer, rabbit, water, dog, monkey, grass, reed, jaguar, eagle, vulture, movement, flint knife, rain, flower, and you pair them with numbers 1 through 13. You get 260 unique combinations before the cycle repeats. So you might be born on 1 alligator, or 7 house, or 13 rain. Each day had a specific divinatory meaning, influencing a person's destiny, the success of a venture, or the auspiciousness of a ceremony. This was your ancient horoscope, your fate teller, your guide to whether today was a good day to. Say, start a war or just stay in bed. The real genius and the real mind-bender came when these two calendars interlocked. Since 365 and 260 share a least common multiple of 18,980, it meant that every 52 years, the beginning of the Ziu Pohuali and the tonal Pohuali would align again on the same day name and number. This 52-year period was known as the calendar round, and it was profoundly significant. The end of a 52-year cycle was a moment of immense cosmic dread and expectation, marked by the new fire ceremony. Imagine living your life knowing that every 52 years, the entire universe might just, stop. It's a pretty intense way to mark time, far more dramatic than just remembering to change your digital clock for daylight saving. During this ceremony, all fires were extinguished, household goods were destroyed, and people waited in terrified darkness for the priests to kindle a new fire in the chest of a sacrificial victim, signifying the continuation of the world for another 52 years. If the fire didn't light, well, then the sun wouldn't rise and the world would end. A rather high-stakes game of will it or won't it, if you ask me. The sunstone itself, this mainstream historical fact, isn't just a representation of these two calendars, but also of the Aztec creation myth, particularly the 5 suns or epochs that the world has passed through, each ending in destruction, leading to the current 5th sun, Nahuialan 4 movement, which they believed would end in earthquakes. It's an incredibly rich piece of art and science, summarizing their entire cosmological understanding. The quirky or fringe tidbit about the sunstone is that it was actually buried by the Spanish in the Zocalo, Mexico City's main square, shortly after the conquest in the 16th century, and wasn't rediscovered until 1790, when it was uncovered during street repairs. It had been face down, acting as a paving stone for over 2 centuries. Can you imagine tripping over that? Oops, sorry, just stubbed my toe on a universe-ending calendar. So, while the sunstone might look like a giant, intricately carved pizza, it was, in fact, a complex, interlocking time-tracking system, a spiritual compass, and a historical record all rolled into one. It shows a civilization deeply, intricately connected to the movements of the heavens, not just for practical purposes, but for the very continuation of existence. Their obsession with keeping time wasn't just about planting corn. It was about preventing the end of the world. And that, my friend, is a whole different level of calendrical pressure. You lift your gaze skyward, not to merely admire the vast, inky expanse dotted with diamond-bright stars, but to read it. You're standing in ancient China, centuries melting into millennia, and the sky isn't just a pretty backdrop. It's the emperor's personal clock, his cosmic validation. Every shift, every phase of the moon, every subtle tilt of the sun's path across the heavens, all of it must be meticulously charted, predicted, and understood. For in this land, the calendar isn't just a tool for farmers or merchants. It is the very bedrock of imperial authority, a divine ledger proving the Son of Heaven still holds his mandate. You can almost feel the hushed reverence, the immense pressure on the court astronomers. Imagine them, cloaked in silk, peering through sighting tubes or noting observations on bronze armillary spheres. Their lives, perhaps even the fate of a dynasty, hanging on the accurate calculation of an eclipse or the precise start of a new year. Because if the emperor's astrologers mess up, if the predicted eclipse fails to appear, or appears on the wrong day, or if the seasons genuinely feel out of whack with the announced calendar, it's not just an oopsie. Oh no. It implies the heavens are displeased. It suggests the emperor has lost his divine right to rule. Good luck explaining away that cosmic clerical error to an agitated populace and a very nervous emperor. You probably won't survive this particular bureaucratic blunder. It's enough to make you wish for the simple chaos of Rome's early calendar, where at least you could just bribe a pontiff to add a few days. Here, it's literally a matter of life, death, and dynastic legitimacy. The Chinese calendar, you quickly discern, is a magnificent beast of a lunisolar system, far more intricate than most of its contemporaries. It marries the moon's poetic monthly dance with the sun's stoic annual march. You see, a lunar month is roughly 29.5 days, meaning 12 lunar months only add up to about 354 days. That's a good 11 days short of a solar year, the actual time it takes for Earth to orbit the sun, and for the seasons to reliably repeat. If you just stuck to lunar months, your new year would drift backwards through the seasons like a sleepy boat against the current. Farmers, those ever-practical souls, would find themselves planting rice in the snow and harvesting dust. So, like the Mesopotamians you remember from earlier, the Chinese embraced intercalation, adding an extra month periodically to keep things aligned. But they didn't do it willy-nilly. Their system was highly sophisticated, aiming to ensure that the winter solstice always fell in the 11th month, and that the first day of spring, a crucial agricultural marker, occurred in the first month. This wasn't just about throwing in a month when things felt a bit off. It was driven by precise astronomical calculations. They developed the concept of solar terms Jiki, 24 points along the sun's ecliptic path, each marking a distinct period in the solar year, crucial for agriculture. These terms were spaced about 15 days apart, and the calendar had to ensure these solar markers remained consistent. This constant push and pull between the moon and the sun, the need for both lunar precision for rituals and solar accuracy for farming, led to an incredible level of astronomical observation. The Imperial Astronomical Bureau, a permanent fixture of Chinese courts for millennia, was probably the most sophisticated governmental scientific institution in the ancient world. They weren't just predicting. They were calculating, observing, and, crucially, calibrating. Every new dynasty, in a symbolic act of renewal and validation, would often issue its own new calendar, a rectification of time that declared its legitimacy and the auspiciousness of its reign. It was like a cosmic operating system upgrade, only with far higher stakes. Imagine if Google updated your calendar app and accidentally caused a famine. That's the kind of pressure these astronomers were under. One quirky tidbit about this system is the meticulous recording of astronomical events, not just for practical use, but for astrological prognostication. They didn't just note eclipses. They meticulously logged comets, supernovas, planetary conjunctions, all interpreted as omens, good or ill, directly reflecting the emperor's virtue. These records are an invaluable source for modern astronomy, by the way. Speaking of unique features, the Chinese also developed a 60-year sexagenary cycle, a combination of 10 heavenly stems and 12 earthly branches, used to count days, months, and years. This cycle repeats every 60 years, providing a longer-term chronological framework, somewhat akin to a supersized version of our 7-day week looping over and over, but for a lifetime. It's like their version of the Gregorian calendar, but with extra layers of philosophical meaning. Historians still argue whether the earliest precise mathematical rules for intercalating months in China developed independently, or were influenced by calendrical knowledge from westward civilizations. perhaps via Silk Road exchanges. The debate highlights the fascinating interplay of isolation and diffusion in ancient scientific advancements. The level of administrative control over time itself was astounding. From the highest imperial decree setting the official calendar, to the local officials ensuring its promulgation down to the smallest village, time was a state-controlled commodity. Every farmer knew when to plant, every official when to collect taxes, all orchestrated by the celestial rhythm interpreted and decreed by the Son of Heaven. It was a calendar system that demanded not just mathematical prowess, but political acumen and an unwavering belief in the interconnectedness of heaven and earth. And when you think about how many different calendar systems we've trudged through, each with its own quirks and flaws, you have to admire the sheer intellectual muscle put into this particular one, even if it meant risking your neck for a miscalculated moon phase. It certainly put the pressure on the astrologers to get it right. You feel the oppressive humidity of the monsoon season giving way to the crisp air of an Indian winter. The scent of jasmine mingling with wood smoke as you stand on the banks of a great river. You watch as a pundit, head bowed over a meticulously inscribed palm leaf manuscript, calculates the auspicious moment for a wedding, his fingers tracing patterns not just in numbers, but in the very fabric of time. Here in the sprawling, vibrant tapestry of the Indian subcontinent, timekeeping isn't just a matter of sun and moon. It's a kaleidoscopic dance of astronomy, astrology, regional custom, and spiritual devotion. Each thread woven into a calendar, or rather, calendars, plural. Because if there's one thing ancient India excelled at, it was diversity in all things, especially its systems of measurement. You thought the Roman calendar was a mess, rife with political shenanigans and confusing intercalations. Bless your naive, chronologically challenged heart. Imagine that, then multiply it by a dozen major kingdoms, each with its own preferred astronomical school, its own starting epoch, its own unique set of festival dates, and its own delightful quirks regarding when a new day, month, or even year actually began. It was less like having one clock and more like having 1,000 grandfather clocks, each chiming at a different hour based on whether the local astrologer had a good cup of chai that morning. If you were a traveling merchant trying to synchronize your trade across different Indian kingdoms, honestly, you probably wouldn't survive the headache, let alone the journey. Good luck explaining why your goods arrived 3 days late for the harvest festival, because your calendar said it was still Tuesday, while theirs insisted it was already Friday, and the sacred cows were already halfway through the ceremonial feast. At its core, most Indian calendrical systems are lunisolar, meaning they attempt to reconcile the lunar month with the solar year, much like some of the Mesopotamian systems we stumbled through. But here's where it gets delightfully complicated. While the lunar month is based on the moon's phases, the length of the solar year could be calculated in various ways. You have the sidereal year, based on the sun's position relative to distant stars, and the tropical year, based on the sun's return to the vernal equinox. Different Siddhantas, or astronomical treatises, offered varying constants for these calculations, leading to slightly different lengths for the year, and consequently different dates for everything. The Surya Siddhanta, a highly influential Sanskrit astronomical text, laid out one of the most widely adopted frameworks, providing sophisticated methods for calculating planetary positions, eclipses, and yes, the precise length of the sidereal year. It was the ancient equivalent of having multiple software packages for your calendar, each with slightly different algorithms, all claiming to be the most accurate. Then there are the eras. Oh, the eras. Forget your simple BC AD. In India, you could be living in the Vikrama Samvat, which starts in 57 BCE and is popular in northern and western India, or the Saka Samvat, beginning in 78 CE, widely used in the south and also adopted as the national civil calendar of India. But wait, there's more. You have regional eras like the Kalam era of Kerala, starting in 825 CE, or the Bengali San, which traces its lineage back to the reign of Akbar. Keeping track of them all was less about remembering dates, and more about having a really good conversion table. You'd need a degree in advanced calendrical linguistics just to figure out when your Grey-Tant's birthday was if she was born under the Gupta era. And let's not even get started on the concept of time itself. While you're fretting about leap seconds, ancient Indian cosmological calendars dealt in timescales that would make your head spin. A kalpa, for instance, is a day of Brahma, lasting 4.32 billion human years, followed by a night of equal length. That makes your annual holiday planning look positively puny. It's a good thing no one had to book a flight across a kalpa. Imagine the cancellation fees. This immense scale of time, often cyclical, demonstrates a profound philosophical engagement with the universe, far beyond mere practical reckoning for planting crops. One of the more unique aspects you'd encounter is the Panchang, the traditional Hindu almanac. This isn't just a calendar. It's a daily guide providing 5 key elements for each day. The lunar day Tithai, the lunar mansion Nakshatra, the lunar fortnight Paksha, the solar day Vara, and the yoga and Karana astrological combinations. It's like a daily horoscope, weather forecast, and to-do list all rolled into one, meticulously calculated for your specific location. Historians still argue whether the astronomical precision of certain Indian calendars truly developed entirely independently, or if there was significant cross-pollination with Hellenistic astronomy via trade routes. Either way, the indigenous development of such complex systems is breathtaking. You also find that within this diversity, there are different calendar reform movements, astronomers continually refining calculations, trying to bring order to the chronological chaos, much like Caesar in Rome, but without a single emperor to enforce it universally. Religious festivals, which dot the annual cycle, are often tied to specific astronomical conjunctions, ensuring the heavens themselves dictate the timing of sacred rites. So, while you might complain about daylight saving time, imagine having to adjust your entire life based on whether the moon was in the Purvabhadrapada Nakshatra, or if Mercury was currently retrograde in the Rohini constellation. It gives running on Indian stretchable time a whole new cosmic meaning. This rich, multi-layered approach to time wasn't about a single, universally accepted calendar, but a complex, localized, and deeply spiritual understanding of the universe's rhythm, each community dancing to its own unique celestial beat. You drift now, not through vast empires or sun-baked deserts, but into the hushed, starlit nights of ancient Judea. Imagine the crisp air, the scent of olive groves, and above you, a sky so utterly drenched in stars it feels like velvet scattered with diamonds. Here, time isn't just an earthly convenience. It's a divine tapestry, woven by celestial movements and interpreted by devout hands. You stand with those who look not just to the sun, but with equal reverence to the moon, because for them, time's heartbeat is a sacred rhythm, a promise from something far greater than any pharaoh or emperor. This is where you encounter the Hebrew calendar, a fascinating beast of a system that manages to be both profoundly spiritual and intensely practical. Unlike the purely lunar calendars that sent your ancient farming ancestors into a tailspin of seasonal confusion, remember that debacle where spring festivals showed up in winter. And unlike the purely solar systems that ignored the moon's poetic ebb and flow, the Hebrew calendar embraced both. It's lunisolar, meaning it attempts to reconcile the moon's monthly cycle with the sun's annual journey. You see the slender crescent appear in the evening sky, a fresh start, a new month. But you also know that your holy days, tied to the agricultural cycle and specific seasons, simply must fall in the right time of year. Passover, for instance, needs the barley harvest. If Passover starts in, say, December, well, you probably won't survive this year's harvest because there won't be one. That's the core tension you're feeling here, the push and pull between the divine monthly marker and the earthly yearly reality. Initially, this balance was maintained through observation. Imagine a council of rabbinic authorities poised at the end of a lunar month, their eyes scanning the twilight horizon for the first sliver of the new moon. If it appeared, the new month was declared, and messengers were dispatched with torches and smoke signals, think ancient internet, but with more fire hazards to spread the news throughout the land. And if the new moon wasn't sighted, well, you just waited another day. It sounds idyllic, a harmonious dance with nature, right? But then comes the tricky part, ensuring the festivals land in their proper seasons. Because 12 lunar months fall about 11 days short of a solar year. Over time, your harvest festivals would creep earlier and earlier into the year, like a perpetually early party guest who shows up before you've even put out the snacks. To fix this chronological drift, the Hebrew calendar developed a system of intercalation, adding an extra month. They didn't just pick one at random. This wasn't some Mesopotamian king's whim to extend his birthday celebrations. This was serious business. The decision to add a 13th month, a leap month known as Adar II, was based on astronomical observation and agricultural markers, primarily the state of the barley crop. If the barley wasn't ripe enough for the Passover offering, or if the equinox hadn't arrived, a 13th month was inserted. It was an intensely practical yet deeply spiritual act, ensuring that the rhythm of the heavens aligned with the rhythm of the land and the divine commandments. One quirky tidbit about this early observational phase is just how hands-on it was. Picture esteemed scholars, not just gazing at the stars, but also trekking out into the fields, poking at barley stalks. Is it Aviv? They'd ponder, referring to the stage of ripeness needed. Their agricultural acumen was as crucial as their astronomical knowledge. It feels almost quaint, doesn't it? A calendar decided by a mix of moonlight and grain, rather than algorithms and atomic clocks. But it worked for a time, for a people largely concentrated in one geographic region. However, as the Jewish diaspora spread after the destruction of the Second Temple, maintaining this unified, observation-based calendar became incredibly challenging. Communication was slow, unreliable, and dangerous. Imagine trying to coordinate a global holiday schedule when your only notification system is a guy on a donkey. Did the moon get sighted in Jerusalem yet? My cousin in Babylon needs to know if he can start his holiday preparations. This logistical nightmare, compounded by persecution and the desire for religious unity, eventually led to a monumental shift. This brings us to one of the mainstream historical facts: the transition from an observational calendar to a fixed, calculated one. This pivotal reform is traditionally attributed to Hillel II in the mid-4th century CE. Faced with dwindling Jewish communities in the land of Israel and the growing pressure from Roman authorities, Hillel II is said to have codified the rules for calculating the calendar for all time. No longer would it rely on sighting the moon or checking the barley. Instead, precise mathematical rules based on cycles of the moon and sun would dictate the start of months and the insertion of leap years. This was a move of profound foresight, ensuring that Jewish communities worldwide could maintain a unified religious calendar, even without a central authority or reliable communication. It's like switching from a scavenger hunt to a meticulously printed itinerary for all your religious celebrations. Much less stressful. But, as with any ancient reform, historians still argue whether Hillel II truly fixed the calendar in a single act, or if it was a more gradual process of codification that culminated around his era. Was it a sudden decree, a brilliant flash of calendrical genius, or the slow, deliberate crystallization of existing practices and computations? The debate highlights the complex, often messy, way that historical changes unfold, even those that seem, in hindsight, to be perfectly logical and necessary. The Hebrew calendar, in its current calculated form, relies on the metonic cycle, a 19-year cycle where 7 leap months are added to keep the lunar months aligned with the solar year. So, in any 19-year span, you'll have 12 regular years with 12 months and 7 leap years with 13 months. This echoes a similar concept you might remember from the Greeks, or even the Mesopotamians trying to wrangle their lunar calendars. It's like the universe's recurring joke, reminding you that 12 lunar months just don't quite fit into one solar year. So you constantly have to cram an extra one in there every now and then, like trying to fit one more item into an already overflowing suitcase. Just one more, it'll fit, I swear. The beauty of this system, once fixed, is its predictability and its deep connection to the Jewish faith. Every month, every festival, every fast day is precisely mapped out, not just for a few years, but for centuries to come. It's a divine timetable, guiding spiritual life, commemorating historical events, and marking the rhythm of creation. While you might find the intricate calculations a bit mind-boggling, involving concepts like moled, the calculated moment of the new moon, the result is a calendar that has endured for millennia, a testament to its ingenuity and the profound significance it holds. You might think those ancient calendar makers were just trying to avoid a bad barley harvest, but they were building something far more enduring. A framework for faith, a timeline for tradition, deeply rooted in the cycles of the heavens, yet profoundly human in its meticulous design. You squint, sweat trickling down your temples, the air shimmering above the endless ochre dunes. The sun, a relentless, fiery orb, beats down on you, warming the sand beneath your bare feet until it feels like walking on a griddle. It's a sweltering summer, and you are deep in the Arabian Peninsula, fasting. The water skin is empty, your throat parched, and every minute until sunset stretches into an eternity. This is Ramadan, a holy month when Muslims abstain from food and drink from dawn till dusk. And if you were truly out here, without modern hydration and emergency services, you probably wouldn't survive this, by the way. Just a thought for your historical travels. Now, imagine that same Ramadan years later, but this time you're shivering, wrapped in thick cloaks, stamping your feet in the frosty air. The days are short, the nights long, and breaking your fast with a steaming bowl of lentil soup feels less like an act of endurance and more like a cozy evening ritual. What just happened? Did the seasons get their wires crossed? Not at all. You're simply experiencing the beautiful, predictable, and utterly logical drift of the Islamic calendar. Unlike many of the calendars we've explored so far, the pragmatic solar calendar of the Egyptians, the often intercalated lunisolar systems of the Chinese or Hebrews, or even the Roman beast that Caesar finally tamed. The Islamic calendar is purely, elegantly lunar. It pays absolutely no mind to the sun's journey through the zodiac or the turning of the seasons. It just follows the moon. Each month begins with the sighting of the new crescent moon, and each year consists of 12 lunar months. This means an Islamic year clocks in at approximately 354 or 355 days. A full 10 to 11 days shorter than our familiar Gregorian solar year of 365.25 days. The beauty of this system is its simplicity and its deep connection to observable celestial phenomena. You don't need a complex understanding of equinoxes or solstices. You just need to look up. When you see that sliver of a new moon after the old one has vanished, you know a new month has begun. This tradition, rooted in early Islamic practice, means that dates can sometimes vary slightly from region to region, depending on when and where the crescent moon is actually sighted. It's less about precise astronomical calculations and more about direct observation, a collective act of witness. This is a point of fascinating modern debate. Actually, as some contemporary scholars and communities use astronomical data to predict and announce new months, while others strictly adhere to the physical sighting of the crescent. Historians still argue whether early Islamic communities always strictly adhered to visual sighting, or if astronomical calculations played a more significant role in coordinating dates, especially for larger, widespread events. But here's the fun part, or perhaps the slightly inconvenient part, depending on your seasonal preferences. Because the Islamic year is shorter than the solar year, its months, and by extension its holy days and festivals, slowly but surely cycle backward through the solar seasons. Over the course of about 33 solar years, the entire Islamic calendar will have completed a full cycle, bringing every month and every observance through every season of the year. So, that Ramadan you endured in the sweltering heat, give it 15 years or so, and it will be a winter affair. The Eid al-Fitr feast, which marks the end of Ramadan, might be celebrated with spring flowers one year, then summer barbecues the next, then autumn leaves, and finally snow. Imagine trying to plan your annual Eid sale at the local mall. You'd have to completely reevaluate your inventory every few years. Oh, last year we sold out of swimwear. This year it's all parkas. Good thing I kept the receipts. This continuous drift has profound implications for religious life. The annual pilgrimage to Mecca, the Hajj, falls in the month of Dhu al-Hijjah. Performing the Hajj in the cool of winter is a vastly different physical and logistical challenge than undertaking it in the scorching summer heat of the Arabian desert. Likewise, fasting during Ramadan becomes significantly more arduous when the days are long and hot, demanding immense discipline and resilience, whereas shorter, cooler winter days offer a gentler experience. This cyclical experience ensures that Muslims globally encounter these religious duties in all seasonal contexts, fostering a universal understanding of faith that transcends specific climatic conditions. The mainstream historical fact here is that the Islamic calendar, known as the Hijri calendar, officially began counting its years from the Hijra, the migration of the Prophet Muhammad from Mecca to Medina in 622 CE. This pivotal event in Islamic history marked the establishment of the first Muslim community, and thus became the 0 point for their unique system of timekeeping. Unlike our Anno Domini, or Common Era dating, the Hijri calendar uses AH, after Hera. A quirky tidbit is how this purely lunar system creates a rhythm of its own, independent of the agricultural cycles that drove so many other ancient calendars. While farmers in Egypt needed to know exactly when the Nile would flood, and Mesopotamians wrestled with planting seasons, the Islamic calendar, born in a largely nomadic and mercantile society, didn't tether itself to the whims of harvest. Its purpose was spiritual, ritualistic, and communal, fostering a sense of shared time and observance that transcended geographical and seasonal variations. The focus shifted from aligning with nature's growing cycles to aligning with a divine order, observed through the moon's consistent phases. Think back to the chaotic Greek calendars, where every city-state seemed to have its own system, or Rome's early political hot potato of a calendar. The Islamic calendar, despite its seasonal drift, maintains an internal consistency and a global unity that was largely absent in many of those earlier systems. Its adherence to the lunar cycle provides a clear, universally observable marker for time, fostering a sense of shared rhythm for a global community. While you might complain about Ramadan shifting to your birthday next year, at least you know everyone else is observing it then too. No more is it Tuesday or is it the 3rd of Skiraphorian? Existential crises. The moon waits for no man, nor does it care about your neatly organized seasonal wardrobe. It just keeps on orbiting, and the Islamic calendar follows along. A testament to a timekeeping system that prioritizes celestial observation and spiritual unity over agricultural convenience. And that in itself is a rather cool, if occasionally sweltering, way to measure the passage of time. Grasp the astronomical challenges that made incorporating leap days so notoriously difficult. You're standing, perhaps, on a sun-drenched ancient plain, feeling the warmth on your skin, but there's a subtle unease in the air. The trees are budding, the days are lengthening, and yet it feels just a little off. The harvest festival, the one you've celebrated since childhood, feels like it's shifted. It used to arrive when the first fruits were truly ripe, when the air hummed with a particular kind of vibrant heat. Now, it's a week early, or perhaps a week late, the fruit still clinging stubbornly to the branches, or already past its prime. This tiny, almost imperceptible drift, year after year, is the silent, insidious problem that plagued nearly every civilization attempting to reconcile human lives with the relentless, unyielding march of the cosmos. You see, the Earth, in its grand ballet around the sun, doesn't dance to a perfectly round number. It's not 365 days. It's not even a neat 365 and a quarter. Oh, how humanity wished it were. Instead, our planet completes one full orbit in approximately 365.2422 days. That fractional bit, that 0.2422 of a day, is the entire source of this cosmic headache. If you simply declared every year to be 365 days long, you'd be falling behind by almost a quarter of a day each time the Earth returned to its starting point. Over just 4 years, you'd be a full day behind. Over a century, you'd be off by nearly a month. Imagine trying to coordinate planting, tax collection, religious festivals, or even the grand procession of the pharaoh if your calendar drifted by a month every 100 years. You'd probably not survive the ensuing chaos, honestly. The crops would fail, the gods would be angry, and your local timekeeper would be looking for new employment, or perhaps a new head. So the ancients, observing the sun's steady march across the sky, realized they needed to account for this annoying fraction. Remember how the Egyptians, with their predictable Nile floods, were among the first to figure out a mostly fixed-length solar year. Even they wrestled with this fractional problem, initially ignoring it, then subtly adjusting. But it was Julius Caesar, with his Alexandrian astronomer Sosigenes, who truly attempted a grand, systemic fix that became the mainstream historical fact of the Julian calendar. His genius was in simplifying. Let's just add a leap day every 4 years, assuming a year of 365.25 days. It was a massive improvement over the wildly dysfunctional Roman calendar of his era, which, as you might recall, was so prone to political manipulation that it once had 445 days in a single year just to catch up. Caesar's calendar brought order, a predictable rhythm to time that Rome desperately needed. But here's the rub, that tiny 0.0078 difference, 0.25 minus 0.2422, might seem utterly insignificant. It's less than 11 minutes a year. Who cares about 11 minutes? You probably spend more time than that trying to find the perfect pillow spot. But multiply 11 minutes by 4 years, then by 100 years, then by 1,000. That seemingly insignificant drift accumulates. After roughly 128 years, the Julian calendar was off by a full day. By the 16th century, the calendar was lagging behind the actual astronomical year by a full 10 days. This meant that the vernal equinox, the true start of spring, which was supposed to fall on March 21st, was now happening on March 11th according to the calendar. For farmers, it might not have been catastrophic in the short term, but for religious institutions, particularly the Christian Church, this was a massive problem. Easter, for example, is tied to the vernal equinox and the first full moon thereafter. If the equinox was off, then Easter would drift further and further away from its traditional springtime setting. This persistent problem meant that even Caesar's brilliant reform wasn't the final answer. The quirky tidbit here is that this accumulated error became a source of significant theological and political debate. It wasn't just about getting the date right. It was about cosmic harmony and the correct observation of sacred rites. Pope Gregory XIII in 1582 finally enacted the Gregorian calendar reform to correct this precise error. His solution: still add a leap day every 4 years, unless the year is divisible by 100, but not by 400. So, 1700, 1800, 1900 were not leap years, but 2000 was. This remarkably subtle adjustment brought the calendar incredibly close to the true astronomical year, with an error of only about 26 seconds per year, meaning it would take over 3,000 years for it to be off by a single day. You can almost feel the collective sigh of relief from generations of frustrated astronomers and clergy. But think about the sheer dedication required to track these tiny discrepancies over centuries. It wasn't about flashy discoveries. It was about meticulous, often tedious, observation and calculation. And historians still argue whether the resistance to adopting the Gregorian calendar, particularly in Protestant countries, was primarily due to scientific skepticism or simply a profound reluctance to accept a reform initiated by the Pope. The calendar, after all, was never just a tool for timekeeping. It was a deeply ingrained cultural and religious artifact, woven into the very fabric of daily life. Even a seemingly small astronomical correction could send shockwaves through society, demonstrating just how much humanity clung to its constructed sense of order, even when the cosmos insisted on marching to its own. slightly more complex, beat. You feel the deep, resonant hum of old stone, a quiet chill seeping from centuries of careful preservation. Imagine yourself now in the heart of Rome, not on the bustling streets, but within the hushed grandeur of the Vatican, specifically, the chambers where a man named Ugo Boncompagni, known to history as Pope Gregory XIII, paced with a furrowed brow. The year is 1582, and he's not fretting over lost socks or where he left his spectacles. No, his concern is far grander, a temporal tremor shaking the very foundations of the Christian world. You see him, a man in his late 70s, eyes perhaps a little tired but still sharp, gazing out a window at the eternal city. His motivation for what would become known as the Papal Precision Project was a twin-headed beast. Deeply religious, yes, but also remarkably scientific. He understood, perhaps more acutely than many before him, that piety and precision weren't mutually exclusive. In fact, for the grand cosmic order he believed in, they were intertwined. The core problem, the nagging splinter in the collective European consciousness, was Easter. Remember how we talked about the persistent problem of the leap year, that pesky fraction of a day that wouldn't quite fit? Well, that tiny sliver, accumulating over the centuries since Julius Caesar's calendar reform, had become a yawning chasm. By Gregory's time, the Julian calendar was out of sync with the actual solar year by a full 10 days. The spring equinox, astronomically, was falling around March 11th, but the church calendar still marked it as March 21st. This meant Easter, fixed as it was to the first Sunday after the first full moon on or after the vernal equinox, was drifting. It was creeping later and later into the year, threatening to push beyond its traditional seasonal boundaries and creating a liturgical mess. The very date commemorating the resurrection of Christ, the central pillar of the Christian faith, was becoming a chronological anomaly. You can almost hear the sighs of exasperation from every priest trying to schedule their sermons. But it wasn't just about religious adherence. It was about scientific accuracy, too. The Council of Trent, decades earlier, had already put out a quiet call for calendar reform, recognizing the growing discrepancy. The Church, often caricatured as an enemy of scientific progress, was, in this instance, a patron. Gregory gathered a formidable team of astronomers and mathematicians. There was Aloysius Lilius, an Italian physician and astronomer, who proposed the fundamental solution before his death, leaving the heavy lifting of implementation to others. And then there was the brilliant Jesuit mathematician and astronomer Christopher Clavius, the intellectual powerhouse who refined Lilius's calculations and championed the reform. Imagine these minds, poring over ephemerides, calculating the precise length of the tropical year, not just for academic curiosity, but for the spiritual well-being of millions. It's a bit like trying to find the perfect Wi-Fi signal in an ancient cathedral, but with far more profound implications. The solution they devised was deceptively simple in its core principle, yet astronomically profound. The Julian calendar's flaw was counting every fourth year as a leap year, which was slightly too often. The Gregorian correction? Keep the leap year every 4 years rule, but add an exception. Century years, like 1700, 1800, 1900, would not be leap years, unless they were divisible by 400. So 1600 was a leap year, but 1700, 1800, and 1900 were not. The year 2000, divisible by 400, was a leap year. This subtle shift brought the calendar's average year length incredibly close to the actual tropical year, correcting the accumulated drift and preventing future major errors. To implement this, to put the calendar back in sync, they had to perform a rather drastic act of temporal surgery. On Thursday, October 4th, 1582, you witnessed it. People went to bed, and when they woke up, it wasn't October 5th. Oh no, it was October 15th. 10 days simply vanished from the calendar. Poof, gone. Imagine trying to pay your rent when 10 days just vanish. You probably wouldn't survive that kind of temporal shenanigans in the modern world. Think of it as the ultimate fast-forward button, though probably not one you'd ever want to press on your paycheck. This sudden jump, while mathematically necessary, caused a significant amount of confusion and perhaps unsurprisingly, quite a bit of resistance. You can picture the baffled shopkeepers, the bewildered farmers, the general sense of chronological discombobulation. It turns out, telling people they've just lost a chunk of their life, even if it's for astronomical accuracy, isn't always a great way to win friends and influence nations. Catholic countries, naturally, adopted the new calendar fairly quickly. Spain, Portugal, Italy, and parts of France were among the first. But the Protestant nations, that was a different story. They viewed it with deep suspicion, not as a brilliant piece of scientific and religious collaboration, but as a cunning Catholic plot. Many initially refused to accept it, leading to a bizarre situation where for centuries, different parts of Europe were literally living on different dates. Imagine trying to coordinate international trade, or even just send a letter to your cousin across a border, when their October 15th was still your October 5th. Historians still debate the full extent of the public's immediate reaction to the missing days, with some accounts claiming widespread riots, though these are likely exaggerated. What is clear is the resistance, sometimes passive, sometimes outright, from those who saw it as papal overreach. It was as if Gregory, in his quiet Vatican chambers, had tossed a chronological hand grenade into the heart of Europe. You stand on the cusp of something truly monumental, a moment when the very fabric of perceived reality is tugged, stretched, and then abruptly restitched. Imagine, if you will, the hushed whispers turning into grumbles, the grumbles into shouts, as the news trickles out from Rome, across the Alps, and beyond the choppy waters of the English Channel. You're being told, quite unequivocally, that the calendar you've lived by your whole life, the one your parents and grandparents used, is simply wrong. By a good 10 days, no less. It's a bit like waking up one morning and being informed that, actually, Tuesday never happened, and it's suddenly Thursday. Your head spins a little, doesn't it? You probably wouldn't survive the ensuing chaos, honestly. Your meticulously planned dinner party, your cousin's wedding, the due date for the harvest, all suddenly thrown into calendrical disarray. Pope Gregory XIII, remember him, the Papal Precision Project manager. He had, with the help of his learned astronomers and mathematicians, unveiled his magnificent calendar reform in 1582. The goal was noble, realigning Easter with its traditional spring equinox, tidying up centuries of accumulated drift from that old Julian system that just couldn't quite keep pace with the sun. From a purely astronomical standpoint, it was brilliant. From a geopolitical and religious one, oh boy, that was a whole other kettle of fish, simmering with resentment and suspicion. You see, the decree, the papal bull known as Inter Gravissimas, arrived in a deeply fractured Europe. The Protestant Reformation was still a raw wound. Catholicism versus the burgeoning Protestant faiths, a line drawn in blood across the continent. So when the head of the Catholic Church declared that everyone needed to jump 10 days forward, that Thursday, October 4th, 1582, would immediately be followed by Friday, October 15th. The immediate reaction wasn't a collective sigh of relief for chronological accuracy. For many, especially in lands where Luther's teachings had taken root, it was seen as another insidious papal plot. Why, they might have scoffed, should we trust a calendar reform from the very same church that tells us we can't read our own Bibles? It was less about the stars and more about the stripes of theological allegiance. Catholic countries, naturally, fell largely into line, relatively quickly. Spain, Portugal, Poland, and most of the Italian states, along with a few others, embraced the new Gregorian calendar within months of its promulgation. Imagine the sheer bureaucratic nightmare of trying to coordinate that change, though. Records had to be updated, contracts adjusted, debts recalibrated. It must have been an absolute field day for unscrupulous merchants, thinking they could shave a few days off a payment due date. Oh, that was due on the 10th. Sorry, that day just vanished into thin air, I guess. A real head-scratcher for the accounting department of the day, I assure you. But for the Protestant nations, the transition was glacial if it happened at all. Germany, a patchwork quilt of Catholic and Protestant principalities, became a living, breathing testament to calendar confusion. Some states adopted it swiftly. Others clung to the old Julian calendar like a comfort blanket, even as the seasons drifted further out of sync. You could travel a short distance and find yourself in a different date, not just a different time zone. What year is it? Became less of a philosophical question and more of a practical necessity. It was almost as if they were saying, we'd rather be wrong together than right with them. The United Kingdom, ever the island of unique traditions, famously resisted for over a century and a half. For you, living in Britain in 1752, imagine the hullabaloo when Parliament finally passed the Calendar, New Style Act. It wasn't just 10 days anymore. By then, the Julian calendar had fallen a full 11 days behind the Gregorian. So, Wednesday, September 2nd, 1752, was followed immediately by Thursday, September 14th. This, of course, led to widespread protests, riots even, with cries of "Give us back our 11 days." People genuinely believed their lives had been shortened, their wages stolen for days they hadn't worked. They didn't quite grasp the concept that time wasn't being subtracted, merely shifted. It was a beautiful example of how deeply ingrained a system, even a faulty one, can become in the collective psyche. One historical tidbit that always makes me chuckle is the story of those who thought their rent was still due on the old quarter days, leading to further confusion and disputes. Even beyond Western Europe, the adoption was piecemeal and protracted. Orthodox Christian countries, such as Russia and Greece, held out for an incredibly long time, largely due to their strong adherence to traditional religious practices and a deep distrust of anything emanating from Rome. Russia, for example, didn't fully switch until after the Bolshevik Revolution in 1918. Can you imagine running a modern empire with a calendar that's weeks off from the rest of the world? It makes international diplomacy and trade a fascinating exercise in chronological gymnastics. Right, so your 5th of December is our 18th of December, unless it's a leap year. Then it's slightly different. And don't even get me started on the Easter calculations. It sounds like a bad math problem you probably won't survive. Historians still argue whether the initial resistance was primarily theological, rooted in a deep-seated anti-Catholic sentiment, or if it was simply a matter of human inertia, a reluctance to change something so fundamental to daily life. Perhaps it was both, a perfect storm of religious animosity and an innate discomfort with disruption. The sheer longevity of the Julian calendar in some parts of the world, lasting well into the 20th century, speaks volumes about the human tendency to cling to the familiar, even when the familiar is demonstrably less accurate. It took centuries, not decades, for the Gregorian calendar to truly become the global standard. A testament to the fact that even the most scientifically sound reforms can be derailed by politics, pride, and the stubbornness of habit. You blink, a slow, heavy blink, as the digital clock on your bedside table suddenly leaps forward an hour, or perhaps just stubbornly refuses to acknowledge the change. Outside, the morning light, which should feel crisp and new, now punches through your window at an ungodly earlier hour, mocking your body's internal clock. This, my friend, is the subtle, insidious chaos woven into the fabric of our so-called modern calendar. A chaos born from two seemingly innocuous concepts: daylight saving time and the international dateline. Even after millennia of tweaking, adjusting, and outright battling with the heavens, humanity still hasn't quite managed to smooth out all the wrinkles. You'd think by now, with all our fancy satellites and atomic clocks, we'd have this time thing down. But oh no, we still cling to these oddities like they're the last pieces of a grand, cosmic puzzle. Consider daylight saving time first, that annual ritual where we either spring forward into a bleary-eyed state of sleep deprivation, or fall back into a temporary illusion of extra rest, only to have our evenings plunged into premature darkness. You remember all those early attempts at calendar reform, from the messy Mesopotamian fixes to the grand Roman overhauls under Caesar. Well, this is just another iteration of humanity trying to bend time to its will, albeit with slightly less dramatic consequences than a civil war. The idea itself has a surprisingly quaint origin, often attributed to none other than Benjamin Franklin, who, while serving as an American envoy in Paris in 1784, penned a satirical essay suggesting that if Parisians woke up earlier, they could save on candle wax. A charming thought, perhaps, but hardly the serious proposal for a nationwide time shift. The modern impetus for daylight saving, the one that truly took root, came much later in the early 20th century. A British builder named William Willett passionately campaigned for it after noticing how much daylight was wasted in the mornings during summer. His argument was simple: shift the clocks forward in spring, and people could enjoy more evening light, potentially saving energy and boosting productivity. You can almost picture him, earnest and slightly exasperated, sketching diagrams on napkins in a smoke-filled London pub, trying to convince his mates that losing an hour of sleep was a small price to pay for longer summer evenings. The first serious adoption occurred during World War I, when Germany, followed by the United Kingdom and other nations, implemented summer time as an energy-saving measure during wartime. The logic was that more daylight in the evenings meant less need for artificial lighting, thus conserving coal for the war effort. Sounds plausible, right? Fast forward a century, and you'll find yourself still grappling with this biannual temporal tango. You might be having dinner with friends, only for one of them to suddenly exclaim, "Wait, is this before or after the time change?" As if the universe itself has decided to play a prank. And if you think this is just a minor annoyance, try being an airline pilot whose entire schedule hinges on these arbitrary shifts. You probably won't survive the mental gymnastics, let alone the paperwork, despite ongoing debates about its actual energy-saving benefits or lack thereof, and mounting evidence of its negative health impacts. including increased heart attacks and traffic accidents in the days following the spring forward. Many nations stubbornly cling to it. Historians still argue whether the perceived benefits of daylight saving time ever truly outweighed its societal disruptions and health impacts, or if it's simply a vestige of a bygone era that we're too lazy to dismantle. Then there's the grand, invisible seam that stitches our planet's days together, the international date line. Imagine a line, not drawn with chalk or paint, but with pure, abstract agreement, snaking its way mostly through the empty expanse of the Pacific Ocean. You cross it heading east and poof, you gain a whole day. Cross it heading west and zap, you lose a day. It's like a magical time portal, except instead of a hobbit hole, it's just a line on a map. This necessity arose because as exploration and global travel became commonplace, particularly during the age of sail, circumnavigating the globe posed a perplexing problem. What day was it? If you sailed west, chasing the sunset, you would effectively have one more day, according to the sun, than your counterparts who stayed put. Sail east, and you'd have one less. By the time Ferdinand Magellan's expedition returned to Spain in 1522, after the first circumnavigation, the crew discovered they were a full day behind the local calendar. They'd meticulously kept track of their days, but the Earth's rotation had subtly added an extra solar day for them as they traveled west. This discrepancy proved that a fixed line was needed to demarcate where one day ended and the next began globally. The International Date Line, formally established in 1884 at the International Meridian Conference, largely follows the 180th meridian of longitude. But here's where the quirky tidbit comes in. It's not a straight line. Oh no, that would be far too simple for humanity's calendar-making inclinations. Instead, it zigzags around various island nations and political boundaries to avoid splitting countries or even island groups into two different calendar days. Take Kiribati, for example, an island nation in the Central Pacific. In 1995, they actually moved a large portion of the international date line eastwards to encompass all their islands within the same day. Why? Because before that, their nation was split by the line, meaning government offices on one side would be on a different day from those on the other, making coordination a bureaucratic nightmare. Can you imagine trying to schedule a Monday morning meeting when half your team is still living in Sunday? It's the kind of temporal headache that makes you appreciate why the ancient Romans, with their wildly inconsistent calendars, probably just threw their hands up and declared it Caesar's problem. The IDL is a testament to our global interconnectedness, but also a constant reminder of how arbitrary our timekeeping can still be, dictating whether you wake up on a Tuesday or a Wednesday, all because of an invisible line on the ocean. These modern calendar oddities, while less dramatic than a missing leap month or a politically manipulated year, still manage to inject a delightful dose of confusion into our meticulously ordered lives. 19. Future calendar fantasies. Consider proposals for even more perfect calendars like the world calendar that never quite took off. You slump deeper into your armchair, perhaps a touch weary from all this chronological chaos, and you might think, surely by now, after all those reforms, the tweaks, the leap year shenanigans, and the international date line's subtle jiggling, we've settled on the best possible calendar, right? Ah, my dear time-traveling companion, if only it were so simple. Even with the formidable Gregorian calendar holding sway across most of the globe, the human spirit, ever restless, continues to dream of something more. Something perfectly symmetrical, Perfectly logical, perfect. You see, the modern calendar, for all its improvements, still carries the echoes of ancient compromises. Months are uneven, quarters are a mess, and holidays bounce around the week like a hyperactive toddler on a sugar rush. You probably think organizing your digital photo library is a nightmare. Try tidying up 5,000 years of global timekeeping. You probably won't survive the committee meetings. So, as far back as the late 19th and early 20th centuries, when the world was shrinking thanks to telegraphs and steamships, the idea of calendar reform wasn't just a quirky intellectual exercise. It was pitched as a genuine aid to global commerce, communication, and harmony. Imagine a world where every single date falls on the same day of the week, year after year, where quarters are exactly equal, making economic planning a breeze, where leap days don't throw the entire system into a momentary wobble. This wasn't just a fantasy. It was a well-thought-out proposal known as the World Calendar. Picture it, you wake up on January 1st, a Sunday. The next quarter, April 1st, is also a Sunday. And July 1st, you guessed it, Sunday again. October 1st, you're practically a prophet, it's a Sunday. The world calendar divided the year into 4 identical quarters. Each quarter had 91 days, consisting of one 31-day month, followed by 2 30-day months. So January, April, July, and October would have 31 days, and every other month would have 30. Except, of course, for the little matter of 365 or 366 days in a year. How do you cram 365 days into 4 91-day quarters, which total only 364 days? This is where the intercalary days, those pesky, unattached days, made their appearance once more, but in a very specific and ultimately controversial way. The world calendar proposed a year-end day, designated as W, falling after December 30th. This day was considered a blank day, not belonging to any week. Then in a leap year day, also designated W, would be inserted after June 30th. These 2 days, crucially, would break the continuous 7-day cycle. Your calendar would effectively say, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, whoops, year-end day, then Monday again. This was the ingenious, yet ultimately fatal, flaw for many. Think back to the Abrahamic traditions we discussed. Their absolute insistence on the unbroken 7-day Sabbath cycle. Remember how ingrained that weekly rhythm is, not just in religious practice, but in social patterns. Suddenly inserting a day that doesn't belong to any weekday structure. For many, particularly religious communities, including Christian, Jewish, and Muslim faiths, this was an unacceptable disruption to divinely ordained cycles. It meant their Sabbath, their holy day, would shift relative to the new, fixed weekday pattern of the world calendar. Imagine the outrage if your Friday night dinner, your Sunday church, or your Saturday synagogue service suddenly hopped around the calendar simply because a bunch of calendar reformers wanted neat quarters. This wasn't merely inconvenient. It was, for many, a theological affront. The world calendar had powerful advocates. The League of Nations and later the United Nations even debated its adoption, with proponents arguing passionately for its simplicity, its aid to international commerce, and its potential to eliminate calendar-related confusion in areas like statistics and travel. The idea gained significant traction in the mid-20th century, pushed by figures like Elizabeth Akeley's, who founded the World Calendar Association and campaigned tirelessly for decades. She envisioned a world united by a rational, stable calendar. Indeed, the concept went beyond mere practicality. It held an almost utopian appeal, promising a smoother, more orderly global existence. Yet, despite its elegant structure and the fervent support, the world calendar never quite took off. Mainstream historical fact. Its failure to gain widespread international adoption stemmed primarily from these religious objections to the blank days that broke the continuous weekly cycle. It was a bridge too far, even for a world eager for streamlined efficiency. You can almost hear the sighs of exasperation from economists and statisticians who just wanted a fixed number of working days per month or quarter. A quirky, perhaps fringe, tidbit about calendar reform. Beyond the world calendar, there were even more radical proposals. Some suggested a 13-month calendar with 28 days in each month, plus a final year day. This would make every month begin on a Monday, and every date would fall on the same weekday year after year. The problem? Well, besides the sheer psychological hurdle of adapting to a 13-month year, what would we call that extra month? Undecember. Pre-January? 13 is a prime number, making it utterly unworkable for dividing into quarters or halves. So, while superficially neat for weekly cycles, it was a planning nightmare for larger chunks of time. It proves that even seemingly perfect solutions can introduce new, unforeseen problems. Historians still argue whether the real reason for the world calendar's ultimate demise was solely religious opposition, or if it was simply the immense inertia of habit, the sheer global coordination required, or perhaps a lingering resentment towards any system that felt too prescriptive or centralized. After all, getting nations to agree on anything, let alone something as fundamental as the definition of a week, is a Herculean task. Remember the centuries it took for the Gregorian calendar to be universally accepted. Some countries held out for literally hundreds of years, stubbornly clinging to their Julian days, even as the rest of the world moved on. The world calendar faced an even more interconnected, yet paradoxically, more fractured global landscape. The dream of a perfectly rationalized year, like many utopian visions, foundered on the shores of human tradition, belief, and the delightful, messy chaos of international diplomacy. And so you're still stuck with a February that capriciously changes length every 4 years, and holidays that play musical chairs with the weekdays. You've come a long way from observing the moon's whims, but the path to a truly perfect calendar remains, it seems, just beyond the horizon. 20. Time's unfinished journey. Reflect on humanity's ongoing quest for calendrical perfection, an inherently imperfect endeavor. You stand here now at the precipice of another night, feeling the steady thrum of time marching forward, an invisible river you've learned to navigate with the help of humanity's most ingenious and often most exasperating inventions. The calendar. You glance at your wrist or perhaps your phone and see the date, a precise location in this temporal ocean. You trust it. You arrange your life by it. But as we've journeyed through the eons, from the earliest scratchings on bone to the precision of atomic clocks, you've discovered that this trust is built upon layers of compromise, argument, and the stubborn refusal of the cosmos to simply line up for us. Honestly, after all this, you probably won't survive the urge to just throw your calendar in the bin and live by the sun and moon again. Think back to those primordial days, when you first watched the moon wax and wane, marking the passing nights, a simple rhythm that quickly dissolved into seasonal chaos once agriculture demanded more. Remember the Nile's faithful floods, giving the Egyptians their first stab at a fixed year. Or the Romans, whose calendar was so hilariously broken, it made your modern tax forms look like a children's book. We've tried everything, haven't we? From Caesar's bold decrees to Pope Gregory's meticulous mathematics, from the Mayans' multi-layered cosmic cycles to the Chinese emperor's mandate of heaven, all trying to wrestle the unruly celestial dance into a neat, predictable grid. And yet here we are. Even the mighty Gregorian calendar, the one you mostly live by, isn't truly perfect. It's the closest we've gotten, certainly, a global standard that finally allowed humanity to largely agree on what day it was, saving countless headaches for international trade and travel, though early adopters remember that global grudge. They probably just enjoyed arguing about when Christmas was. But even this masterpiece of papal precision has its quirks. Those irregular month lengths, the way the days of the week shift each year, forcing you to buy a new wall calendar just to know when Tuesday falls. It's not exactly elegant, is it? We simply shoved all the awkward bits, those fractional remainders of Earth's orbital journey, into February, like that drawer in your kitchen where all the random orphaned socks and charger cables end up. The quest for a perfect calendar continues, a sort of astronomical Sisyphean task. You see, the fundamental problem remains. The Earth's orbit around the Sun doesn't neatly divide into an exact number of days, nor does the Moon's cycle into an exact number of days or solar years. It's all a messy collection of fractions. So any calendar we devise is inherently a compromise, a mathematical fudge. There have been many proposals over the centuries, radical new systems designed to be more logical, more symmetrical. Remember how we touched upon the world calendar with its fixed dates for every day of the week, designed to make every year identical. It sounds incredibly convenient, almost too good to be true, doesn't it? Well, it was. Despite its logical appeal, such systems almost invariably fail to gain traction, hitting a solid wall of human inertia, cultural attachment, and perhaps a subconscious fear of losing the familiar, however flawed. It's like trying to convince everyone to switch from QWERTY keyboards. Logically, there might be better layouts, but good luck getting billions of people to retrain their fingers. And besides, imagine the chaos of rescheduling every birthday. Historians still argue whether a truly perfect calendar could ever exist, given the stubborn realities of celestial mechanics and the even stubborner realities of human tradition. Even today, beyond the mainstream Gregorian system, you find echoes of humanity's diverse timekeeping endeavors. Take the fact that many cultures still operate with parallel calendars for religious or cultural observances. The Chinese calendar, for instance, a complex lunisolar system, still dictates traditional festivals, even as the Gregorian calendar organizes their business week. It's like having a work calendar and a fun calendar, where holidays are determined by the phase of the moon and the position of Jupiter. And if you think about it, we're still tinkering at the edges with things like daylight saving time, adding an arbitrary hour here and there, just to mess with your sleep schedule and create international travel headaches. It's a testament to our ongoing, sometimes clumsy, efforts to make time conform to our wishes, rather than simply accepting its boundless flow. So, as you lay there, cozy and warm, let the final echoes of this long, meandering journey through time settle around you. You've witnessed millennia of human ingenuity, desperation, and even a little bit of cosmic stubbornness, all in the service of understanding and organizing the universe's most fundamental mystery, time itself. Feel the gentle hush of the night drawing in, wrapping around you like a soft, familiar blanket. The stars, those ancient timekeepers, begin to pepper the darkening sky, each one a distant whisper of endless cosmic cycles, vast and unknowable. But here, in your own quiet space, time slows, softens its edges, and becomes less about tick-tock precision and more about the quiet, comforting rhythm of your breath. All those calendars, all those careful calculations, they fade into the background now, no longer pressing demands, but simply echoes of a shared human endeavor. You are simply here now, held in the timeless embrace of the moment. Let your thoughts drift, like the last embers of a warm fire, softening and settling into a gentle glow. There is no need for perfect precision here, only the soft, flowing current of peace carrying you gently towards slumber. The day's journey is complete, and the quiet promise of tomorrow waits patiently. Let your body relax, surrender to the pull of rest, and simply be. Sweet dreams.